Good evening. Pursuant to Minnesota Statute Section 13D.021 in the current state of emergency due to the COVID-19 pandemic, this work session of the Independent School District 279 School Board will be conducted via electronic means, internet video conferencing. Consistent with current state and federal pandemic guidance, Superintendent Corey McIntyre and myself, Board Chair Dawson Walton, have determined that due to the health pandemic and emergency declaration, a meeting format allowing for in-person attendance is not practical or prudent for this work session. As a result, it is not feasible for at least one board member, the superintendent, or general counsel to be physically present at the meeting location. It is also not feasible for members of the public to attend at regular meeting location. Members of the public may monitor the work session electronically by streaming online on the district website. An archived copy of the video recording of this work session will also be available on the district website. The purpose of the school work session is to to build trust and teamwork, to exchange information, and when applicable, to provide direction in order to facilitate efficient and effective decision-making at regular board meetings. The outcome of this evening's work session, we're packed full here, will be that board members will receive reports, updates, and information on equity context analysis process, mental health student support model, world's best workforce, and the learning model. Board members, please respond when that you are present on the video conference when I call your name. Director Thomas Brooks.
Here.
Director Heather Douglas.
Here.
Director Tamara Grady.
Here.
Director Mosqueda Jones.
Here.
Director Simons.
Here.
And I'm Director Dawson Walton. I'm here. Superintendent McIntyre.
Here, thank you.
The superintendent's cabinet and several guest presenters are logged onto the video conference as well. I will now ask Superintendent McIntyre to facilitate the agenda items for this evening's work session. Superintendent McIntyre.
Thank you, Chair Dawson Walton, and welcome school board members and members of our cabinet. I also want to welcome a number of our Osseo area school staff who are a part of our presentations this evening. Thank you for your patience for us joining this meeting. We appreciate all the time and contributions you've invested in this evening. Tonight we have a very ambitious agenda, and I want to thank our teams for their efforts in preparing the information for tonight. I know they've worked hard. You'll find these actually four topics are tightly related and integrated into our efforts to improve student achievement and our achievement and opportunity gaps in our district. So just a high-level overview of what's on our agenda for tonight. Our equity context analysis process is a topic that you'll receive an update on the point in time we're in that process for this year, and you'll gain a further understanding about our work and partnership with the Midwest and Plains Equity Assistance Center, understand the ECAP or Equity Context Analysis process, and an understanding of the equity-oriented strategic planning process. Our student mental health and wellness presentation will be our second presentation, which is focused on mental health and well-being of our students and staff, which has increasingly been a focus in our school district even before COVID. These concerns have only been elevated through COVID, and we continue to find ways to meet the mental health challenges of our students and staff. We share that the impact of COVID has been significant in this area and how we're responding in a variety of different roles and changing our practices to meet those needs in the district. And then the third presentation is the World's Best Workforce Strategic Plan. And that third presentation, you're going to have a update on the elements that are required by the Minnesota Department of Education that we have to submit to MDE each year. Board members will examine the various data points related to our district in that plan from the 1920 school year. And then lastly, if time permits, we'll have a brief update on the Osseo Area Schools Learning Model information that we have been collecting. So I'll turn it over to Michael Lehan in just a moment here, but I will kind of help our board members with, we estimate about 20 minutes on our ECAP presentation and 30 minutes on our mental health presentation and about 45 to 50 minutes with our World's Best Workforce. And then time permitting, the learning model update can be done fairly briefly. So about 2 hours of content. And I think I would recommend, we allow each presentation to go forward, our presenters to get through their material and leave time for your questions. And maybe we can try to limit our questions to around 15 minutes or so. Even with that, it might be close to 10 o'clock. So I always like to tell board members, you can always follow up with more detailed information after the meeting if you have additional questions that we can't get to. So with that, again, I'll turn it over to Assistant Superintendent of Equity and Achievement, Michael Lehan, to help introduce the first presentation.
Thank you, Superintendent McIntyre. Can I get confirmation that you can see the presentation?
We can, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Good evening, school board members, Superintendent McIntyre, fellow cabinet members, and members of the viewing audience. As we enter this presentation, it is important to center the conversation first. This is not my charge. It is not Lisa's charge. It is not Rev's charge. Transformation is not a fragmented experience. It is a collaborative process comprised of a coalition of morally aligned individuals who seek educational equity at every level. If our vision of Osseo area schools is one that is bias-free, that sees the identities of BIPOC and LGBTQ+ individuals from an assets-based lens, this work rests with each of us. I offer these truths because as we have begun to build meaning through the ECAP process, these are the authentic perspectives of our courageous thought partners comprised of community members and Osseo area school staff who have offered to walk alongside us during this entirety of the process. There are some truths that we may not want to hear, truths that will undoubtedly create discomfort at the highest level of our organization. While difficult to hear, these truths need air to breathe if we are to advance our work. As the Assistant Superintendent of Equity and Achievement, it is vital that I lean into purpose over fear, that I don't want my silence to be predictable based on the discourse surrounding critical topics. This is what I know. Power concedes nothing without demand, and justice too long delayed is justice denied. As a system, we have said that we are committed to equity for years. Yet how central is anti-racism to how we think, what we do, and how we show up? We have Policy 101, and most recently a resolution set forth post-George Floyd. Beyond this, we have pulse surveys, stakeholder analysis, student surveys, all of which reveal a similar story. Our outcomes for our BIPOC scholars are still largely predictable and at times harmful. I offer this not as an indictment on anyone. In fact, please hear it as a plea that we collectively center this work. We must identify our so that. What is our ethical non-negotiables as a system? The purpose of this ECAP is to support an equity-oriented strategic planning. While we have a history of equity work, this report cannot live on the shelf. As we move forward, it must be integrated into the way of being more than any other equity context we have ever engaged in the past. These outcomes is the experience. We must produce a theory of action that is live, central, and palpable within our system. Finally, we virtually attended a workshop with Midwestern Plains, the MAP Center last week, Thursday and Friday. Earlier, I stated that this work does not rest on the shoulders of Lisa, Rev, or myself. Upon the conclusion of the second day, one of the facilitators made a profound statement that I wish to share with each of you. They stated, "We must begin to till a different type of soil, to plant a different type of seed, so that we grow a different type of fruit to create conditions of excellence and equity." As you listen to my colleagues this evening, please consider the soil that each of us are tilling. Do we have the right seed? Are we willing to help create the conditions that allow our strategic, reimagined, equitable, and just reality to grow and flourish? Let's apply an equity lens to our collective work, question our fundamental assumptions about how we do school and to together create learning environments in our communities that are humanizing, liberating, and joyful for each of our brilliant and beautiful scholars. At this time, I introduce Lisa Hartman, who has been a remarkable partner throughout this process and has championed it from the inception. Lisa, thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Michael. You can go to the next slide. Corey already went over the outcomes of the presentation, but it's to understand our work in partnership with the MAP Center, to learn about the equity capacity analysis process and to understand what equity-oriented strategic planning process looks like. Next slide. Whoops. I just wanted to start by explaining who MAP is. MAP is the Midwest and Plains Equity Assistance Center, which I will refer to as MAP. There's a lot of acronyms with this group, but it is one of 4 regional equity assistance centers that are funded by the United States Department of Education under Title IV of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. This is a nonprofit organization that is working with us at no cost. They provide technical assistance and training upon request of a school district in the areas of race, sex, national origin, and religion. They currently are working in the area of civil rights, equity, and school reform to ensure and promote equitable educational opportunities. The MAP Center serves 13 state educational agencies at that time and is working with over 7,000 public school districts. Next slide. I just wanted to talk a little bit about how we entered into this work, but in the spring of 2020, a memo of understanding was signed by District 279 to work with the MAP Center, and 4 goal areas were developed. The MAP Center provides 3 levels of assistance to school districts, much like a pyramid of interventions or a multi-tiered system of supports, and we have chosen to work with them in Tier 3, which is the most intensive assistance. There are 4 goals, but I'm going to focus on 2 tonight. The first goal was just to meet with the MAP Center to understand the memo of understanding, and that was completed in June and July. And we have been assigned a consultant to whom we work with each month. Our second goal is to do what is called an equity context analysis process. And I'm going to go in a little bit more in depth about what that equity context analysis process is and what its purpose is. The third goal that we have is really to use the outcome of this analysis to guide strategic planning in our district's equity efforts through a process that is called equity-oriented strategic planning. And then there was a 4th goal to develop leadership for equity training, and we did send some of our new leaders to some training through the MAP Center to help develop their ability to be equity leaders. Next slide. So the equity context analysis process, the purpose of it is really to provide an assessment to the extent with which educational equity is evident in our district practices. It identifies areas that may be opportunities for growth, and it supports our equity-oriented strategic planning, as I've said before. It is a set of data collection tools, a comprehensive data collection and analysis process that was developed by Midwest and Plains, and we will be using this data. It's important to note that this is not an audit. An audit is when we invite an outside organization to come in and evaluate where we are. The MAP Center provides us a partnership to work with multiple stakeholders within our own organization, helps us with data collection, and then will guide us through a series of activities where we interpret and we make meaning of where we are in our district. How to complete the ECAP, there are 3 phases in the process. Phase 1 is planning and preparation. We started this work in August with an overview of the ECAP process. We brought together key stakeholders in the district, including cabinet directors, EMO, OPA, principals, teachers, Department of Equity staff, and some community members to get an overview of what the ECAP process is. And then from there, we used their recommendations to choose an ECAP review team, which has met several times this fall, and I'll get into more detail with that. We right now are poised to start phase 2, which is the data collection, and I'll give you more information as to what the data is and how this works. And then the final phase will happen in May. We will get ECAP data profiles that will be generated from the Map Center using their data collection tools. And then we will be taken through a process where our ECAP review team will do an analysis against a rubric that they'll provide for us. The ECAP review team that I refer to, it's important to note that they participate in the orientation, but they're the overseers of the execution of the data collection activities. And ultimately, they will participate in the data co-interpretation and priority setting session that we'll have in May that will guide our equity-oriented strategic planning. We were very thoughtful after the August group. It became very evident that there was a high level of interest that the stakeholders felt that it was important that we formed a representative group with diverse identities to lead the work. So I have just put a list of the members, but you can see that we've included not only different roles within stakeholders, but we also were very, very intentional about representing different racial, gender, sexual orientation, language, and religious identities among the members. As we met and trained with the Map Center, I wasn't quite ready for data collection yet. As we've met and trained with the Map Center, the members of the ECAP review team, I want to share our story. We have spent hours having discussions about this data collection and trying to understand what the Map Center is offering to us. The members of the ECAP review team have expressed a very high level of concern regarding the district's intentions with this work. Our team members represent traditionally marginalized communities within our district, and they in particular have really expressed that the district has engaged them in the past in many ways, through stakeholder surveys, through listening sessions, Reimagine Minnesota, inviting them to table for strategic planning, and a lot of data is gathered so that their voices can be heard. However, they are a little bit leery about the fact that none of this has resulted in significant system changes that have allowed us to provide equity for all of our scholars and to change the narrative that is part of our district with our opportunity and achievement gaps. This group has referred many times to the fact that we have Policy 101 and the school board resolution following George Floyd, yet they can't point to any very effective change efforts. And what's been compelling to me is to hear their stories and to hear their passion about how this has resulted in a great deal of trauma and harm in our marginalized communities. And the trust to participate in another data collection effort is very low. And the team members have a lot of reservation, and I would say even a visceral fear that we are going to enter into yet another process where we're going to ask our communities to come forth and share with us, and this work is not going to result in anything. They don't feel that this data collection, we have data. I think Michael referred to the fact that we've collected data for years, and it constantly tells a narrative about who in our system benefits and who doesn't. And they're afraid that once again, we will do this work and that it is not going to reveal a different narrative of success for our historically marginal students. And if we do not take action, then we are just piling on the harm and the trauma, and they don't want to be part of a process where that's going to happen. Now, having said that, as we've worked with the Map Center, they have really gotten excited about the process and about the work that we're going to embark on. And there is a high level of energy around this. So slide 9, the next one. So a subset of the data review, the ECAP review team is what we call a data collection team. And the task of the team, the subgroup, is that we are going to actually go out and use the data collection tools. And we've been participating in several training sessions. And so during the next month in January and February, we are going to be conducting data collection activities. The members are various ECAP review team members. We have specialists joining us from Learning and Achievement, and then the staff from the Department of Educational Equity are going to help us. In the next slide, I want to explain what the data collection tools are. There are two parts to this. First of all, there will be stakeholder surveys. I've worked with Barb Olson and her department to come up with a very robust communication plan, and with the ECAP review team for us to strategically plan how we're going to go out and work with our communities to make sure that all voices are heard and are represented, and we have a plan for that. There are 4 different stakeholder surveys that will go out. One is for administration, and administration is defined as those that attend the learning leaders meeting, which are assistant principals, principals, directors, coordinators, and assistant soups. There's also a parent caregiver survey that will go out that we are translated and have translated in all of our languages. And our Department of Educational Equity will be working to have a kind of a scaffolded approach to make sure that all of our communities are understanding what the purpose of this data collection is, and to encourage them to participate in it. All staff in our district will have a questionnaire that they will fill out, and staff includes bus drivers and licensed and non-licensed staff, and the final one will be our students. We will be giving a student questionnaire to all students in grades 4 through 12. So that's the survey piece. That survey is going to be launched around February 11th with just a pre-message to families that it's coming. Parents will have an opportunity to opt out of the survey for their children. And then on February 16th, we will be sending out the surveys to all of the stakeholder groups, and the surveys will be due on February 26th. All of the survey data goes directly to the MAP Center, and I will talk a little bit about what happens to the data once they receive it. The other piece that go back, Michael, the other piece that's important is that we have school site reviews. The MAP Center used a methodology where they gathered public data from MDE and from our website regarding the 27 school sites in our district. And from that, they chose 8 representative schools that we are going to go, and we're going to do classroom observations of teachers with a classroom interview or classroom observation protocol. And then we are going to be doing 15-minute teacher interviews. And for those buildings that are going to be in-person learning, which are elementary buildings, we will also be doing a school walkthrough. We have trained our observers. There will be 2 observers that will go to each school. 2 teachers from each grade level at the elementary will be observed and interviewed. And then at the secondary level, we will have 4 for each grade level. And all of that data goes directly to the MAP Center. And we will not be receiving reports from the MAP Center that are disaggregated by building or by particular teachers or by grade levels. What they do is that they really are trying to put together a data picture for our district and our system. Next slide. The second piece of this process that I wanted to talk about after we do the data is that the ECAP review team will meet in the spring, and we will get a set of data reports from the MAP Center, and they will engage us in facilitated conversations so that we can start to make meaning, and we can also then identify where our priorities are for our district. And we're hoping then we've started getting some training on a different way of doing strategic planning, which I have referred to as equity-oriented strategic planning, or they refer to the EOSP process. And I just want to quickly, what we learned on Thursday and Friday was pretty, was very, very strong and really meaningful to me. But traditional strategic planning, which we all know, is that it's a coordinated systemic way to develop direction for an organization. Systemic identification of opportunities and barriers are usually identified using data-driven decision-making. And the outcome is to come out with a process that sets aims, defines our strategies and policies, and provides detailed plans. The equity-oriented strategic planning kind of scaffolds on top of this of 3 different things that we look at. And it really has a different way of looking at data, who's invited to look at the data, and it really includes multiple voices about even which data do we value. And it always asks who has historically benefited and who has been harmed by the practices, policies, and people in our system. It asks who has defined and collected and interpreted the data and who has not been involved in that process. And then it centers the perspectives of historically marginalized groups to deconstruct or construct knowledge to define data, co-create actions and strategies to ensure equity. Next slide. So really what we have is a guiding question. What is it about our system, the people, policies, and practices that is resulting in inequitable outcomes for our students? The ESOP process shifts the focus of our data analysis from identifying gaps for students of color to framing statements about how the system, the people, policies, and practices are really resulting in inequitable outcomes for our students. So we learned a process in this where the first thing we did is that we used our data to develop statements of inequity. When we started off with this, we were taking a look at our data and we started with statements such as Black students in our district on all the metrics and measurements are being underserved, and they stopped us and they said, no, we're going to shift that to a system thinking. And so we came up with a statement of inequity. One of the ones that we came up to is that the current practices in our district result in BIPOC and LGBTQ plus students reporting that they do not feel safe and a sense of belonging in our learning environments at the same rate as our white students. So it's a little bit of a shift onto the system. So after that, the next step is to develop a SMART goal. And based on that particular statement of inequity, we chose by the end of the 2022 school year, BIPOC and LGBTQ plus students will report the same level of safety and belonging as our white students as indicated on our student stakeholder survey data. And then they enter into a stage called hypothesis, where we started having a conversation about who are the people in our district that are involved and responsible for safety and security and a sense of belonging, and then talking about what practices do we have to support that. For example, we have PBIS. You're going to be hearing from some of our mental health coordinators and all of the things that we do. And then we start taking a look at policies that are in place. And then based on all of the things that we think are happening, then we do a theory of change statement, which becomes an if-then kind of statement. So we came up with this if-then statement. So on this one, for example, if we create equity-focused school climate standards, so we actually have standards and indicators, then teachers and principals will better understand how to implement equity practices that cultivate emotionally safe and inclusive school communities. With standards and indicators, it also gives us an opportunity to measure and to hold accountable and to kind of take a look at what's going on in our system. So that's just an example of equity-oriented strategic planning. The next thing I wanted to talk about is just the final slide is what is our timeline and our next steps. The steps we've already completed is that we started the sessions, we've trained with ECAP, and now we're ready for data collection, which will be completed by February 26th. Classroom observations will start on January 25th and will conclude on February 26th. We will have our next equity-oriented strategic planning session will be February 2nd. And then in May, all of our data is going to go to the MAP Center and they are going to prepare data reports and summaries for us. And then they will lead us into the final stage of the ECAP of taking a look at where we are and making recommendations with our review team. And that will happen the week of May 10th through the 14th. The ECAP review team and those of us who have participated in the equity-oriented strategic planning sessions, we do have some questions about how our work will be incorporated into our new strategic plan. We know that TeamWorks has been working with our district, and we're just wondering, some of the wonderings we have is how their methodology and the EOSP methodology will intersect so that the work of these groups is valued and influences our strategic plan. One of the conversations that Michael and Rev and I are having with the ECAP review team and the other participants, community members and such, is they keep asking us, what are you going to do to ensure that this work is going to be moved forward? And they really want us to reassure them that there is a strong commitment from our senior leadership, who they define as Superintendent McIntosh, and our school board. And so the wondering that we have, and our hope and our dreams, are that we might be able to merge the two processes together so that we are absolutely ensuring that equity is centered in our work. Thank you so much for the opportunity this evening to represent the group of stakeholders that have been working so hard on this ECAP process. And at this time, we would entertain any questions or comments that you might have.
Thank you, Mike and Lisa. Nice to see you, Lisa. We now can open it up for questions and comments from the board. And the Superintendent McIntyre said, we do have a pretty big agenda. So, wanting to limit these, we'll do a couple of rounds and then move on to the next presentation. But I will call on Director Simons if you had any questions or comments.
Thank you. This was pretty informative about the process to come. So I'm interested in understanding the findings regarding. I think it's certainly frustrating when we hear people say that they've participated in a process before and there have been no results. And I think that's actually a pretty significant problem for our district, that our board has been continually pointing out to advance that we need to have new ways of thinking, new ways of approaching the work that we're doing in our district, and all factors and all elements of our work to drive different outcomes. So this may not be the appropriate time, so if it's not appropriate to share, we'll wait until a later point when we have more data. But was there any context or specific examples of specific actions that may have been requested or promised that would be acted upon by some level in the district that did not come to fruition? Because I haven't necessarily seen something come to the board level that we haven't taken seriously or approved. So I'm wondering, where in the process was that getting hung up, or were there some specific examples to help us understand things that were recommended or desired that was not met with support?
So Tanya, we're in the process right now of gathering the data. And then in May, when we do our final, that's where we will get together and we will have another data that has been gathered, which then we are going to bring forth recommendations and make recommendations. So at this time, through this particular process, we have not identified action steps as of yet. I did give an example on the slides of the if-then statement, and we're hoping to generate more of those. That was a very early example of our work, just kind of give you a flavor. So at this point, no, and we will terminate this work in May, and our partnership with the MAP Center goes through August of 2021.
Okay, thank you.
Director Simons, so to answer your question, there's been individuals going through the teamworks process for this. There was some opportunities to engage and provide some feedback. Certainly we know that COVID interfered with a lot of the strategic timelines and so forth. That was identified by some of the participants, where they had came to the table and offered perspectives and so forth. And I can certainly engage you offline to share some more information if interested.
Thank you. That's very helpful to understand.
Thank you. Director Brooks.
Yes, so just a couple questions and then maybe a comment. The first question, I think hopefully pretty simple. How were the schools, classrooms, or teachers selected for participation in this?
The MAP Center has a methodology where they went to the Minnesota Department of Education and looked up different demographic points about the 27 schools in our district. And then based on that, they determined what would be a representative sample according to their methodology, and they gave us a list of 8 schools that they recommended. The ECAP review team reviewed that. We felt that, that there was one school that we wanted to change, and so we collaboratively talked about that and came to consensus. The teachers are going to be chosen randomly. They have asked us to put the names of the teachers into like a randomizer and just randomly choose the teachers. I'm working with principals in the next week to contact them about the process and letting their staff know. Observers will contact each one of the teachers and let them know. Michael, Rev, and I are going to make kind of a flipped classroom video type thing that we're going to push out to the teachers explaining their participation and what it means and what's going to be done with the data.
Thank you. Next question. So I know equity it's not something new. And so the question that I have is, what data sets have we been using today prior to this ECAP that we've used or implemented in strategic planning?
I can try to maybe take this one, Director Brooks. I think up till the last year and a half or so, we've had a district scorecard of sorts that this board has really shown strong interest in revising, along with all the other, you're going to see a number of data points later this evening around our world's best workforce that is disaggregated. So there's a wide range of different things that are collected, and it's usually at a high level. And this process really tries to drill it down to the classroom level, and what impact can we see from a teaching and learning perspective on our efforts. So there's a wide range over the years. I think we've tried to collect along the way. Some of the participants on the call have experienced that. So we could probably honestly create a kind of a list or history of the kinds of data we've been looking at over time. And last year was really a tipping point where we really got deep into disaggregation and looking at this through all our student groups and really trying to get a better understanding of that opportunity achievement gap on a deeper level. So I don't know if Michael, you want to, or Lisa, you want to add to that through this process as you compare what we're collecting now with what we've previously had, right?
I don't have anything from a historical context, but one of the pieces that is certainly evident now is this qualitative, the intentionality around the qualitative component, the truly understanding and seeking to understand the lived experience, and then how can we begin to create conditions to respond to that lived experience. So I think that's really central to this experience that may be in contrast to some of the ways in which we've collected data in the past.
I appreciate that. The reason I ask is I think I'm trying to balance a little bit of skepticism and optimism. And it was mentioned before, but I'm worried that we have a significant number of stakeholders involved in this process. It looks like a pretty decent timeline as well. And I just worry that we'll get to the end and end up with data that we may already know, no surprises, and then just minimal change from that. So I guess I quickly just want to say thank you to everyone that has been involved. Thank you in advance to our educators that are involved in the observations. And I hope that a part of this process will include thinking of ways that we can continue to engage the stakeholders that are already involved in this process as it relates to accountability afterward.
Thank you, Director Brooks. Director Mosqueda Jones.
Thank you. Director Brooks took my main question. So I have a simple question. I missed the timing of when the surveys are going out that are due back on February 26th with our stakeholders. Lisa?
We're going to send out prior information on February 11th so that parents know that their students are going to take the survey and that it's coming, and then they'll have a chance to opt out. We're going to push the surveys out on February 16th, and we'll send reminder emails on and text messages and everything that we do on the 21st. But in addition to that, the Department of Educational Equity is going to be working with several of our community leaders, going out to different places and doing a scaffolded approach where they will meet with stakeholders to explain why this is important, have them help get the word out, and do a lot of the work that we've done in the past to ensure that we have good representation. Jenna Johnshoy Aristed from Learning and Achievement, who works with data, is working with us on calculating the percentage of participation that we need to have in each one of our communities to really get a representative sample that's generalizable to the rest of the district.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That answers a couple of my other questions. The only other thing I wanted to say is I appreciate the shift of thinking from the student to system and our system, how we can change the system. So I'm very much looking forward to working together with Teamworks and the EOSP process in order to truly make some systemic changes.
Okay, thank you, Director Mosqueda Jones. Director Douglas.
Thank you. I had a couple of questions. One of my questions is, what are the 8 school sites?
The 8 school sites that were identified are Basswood, Edenbrook, Zanewood, Oakview, Osseo Middle School, Brooklyn Middle School, Park Center Senior High, and Osseo Senior High.
Okay, thank you. I did also have a question about the surveys and making sure that we have representation across all of our communities. And you had specified that could you elaborate on how they're going to ensure that we have enough percentage from each of the communities? Earlier, you had mentioned not just physical communities, but culturally, religiously, how are we going to ensure that all of these different groups have equal percentages or appropriate percentages to get a good representation?
Rev, do you want to expand on that since a lot of that work falls on your staff?
Sure. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to be part of the conversation. So, Heather, if I may, I want to expand a little bit on this. We have ways to know that we're statistically significant within language groups and within racial groups, right? So I won't say that I will, with great confidence, suggest that we have clear indicators across all variables, if you will. But within the control groups that we have, we know what the significance needs to be with response rates. And they vetted this literally with some of the nation's best scholars. So we're going to work collectively to ensure that we have those indicators at those rates. I want to provide a little clarity too around going out. This is COVID. So going out means reaching out, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that we're physically going to be going to mosques and places of worship and other things like that, but we will be reaching out to provide communication about the importance of this to different communities and ensuring that we are communicating, if you will, with leaders that can help us ensure that other opportunities are there. But they do have a power rating, if you will, within their indicators, and they will let us know when we've achieved that reasonable number so we can be confident with the variables that are part of the conversation.
Okay, thank you for expanding on that. Another question I had is, I'm assuming that this survey is going to be delivered virtually through an email link or something like that. And for our students, will this survey be sent out through their devices, or is it something that their parents are going to have to seek out? I know past surveys, they've done them like in the classroom, but we're not.
So, if I can real quick, Heather, answer that as it relates to the prior part of your question. That's true.
Rev, you're freezing.
Unless we do not hit the part. I'm going to mute my camera to see if this helps. And just out of respect so that you can hear me. Is that helpful?
Yes.
When I get this many people on my screen, sometimes I glitch, so I apologize for that. As it relates to the power rankings, it will be a virtual offering first. If we do not obtain that, then we're going to need to do the extra work, if you will, to ensure that we have the power ratings to be confident about our reliability. So at least it will start that way, but I won't guarantee that it will stay that way. We're committed to ensuring that we have the validity of the surveys to ensure that we have a representation within those demographics. So it will start that way, Heather, but I can't promise you that it will stay that way.
I guess
So,
what I'm getting at is I know that for some surveys, parents, especially parents of younger students, had concerns that their students were receiving surveys on their school issued devices and they didn't even know that their students were doing surveys. And so obviously
so
we want as many people to participate as possible, but we also want to make sure that it's informed.
yes, and so on the week of February 11th, I think is the date that we are going to inform all of the parents of this survey and give them the information that their students will be, secondary students will be doing it in their advisory or foundations class, and parents will have the opportunity to opt out. And then for elementary students, they are going to be doing it with their classroom teachers in 4th and 5th grade only. When I worked with the Department of Learning and Achievement, they didn't think that the survey questionnaire was appropriate for first, second, kindergarten through 3rd grade.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you, Director Douglas. Director Grady.
I don't have any questions. I just want to say thank you for including me as a part of this process. This is not easy work. And what's fundamentally different about this than other actionable goals that we've had before is this is really looking at reflecting on the system and who we are as adults and how we maintain an environment that's safe and supportive for our kids and not focused on the deficiencies of the kids themselves. And so I think that that switch in mindset will be very beneficial as we try to work on some problems that are historically entrenched in America. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Grady. I just would echo many of the comments my colleagues made, but, I think my biggest, it's not necessarily a concern, but, something that's raised to me is around the ensuring that we're taking what we're hearing and really applying it to many of the areas we are really attempting to are part of our strategic plan. I think that so many times there's not a lack of data. I mean, that's the problem. And I heard, Lisa, you say that what you've heard from participants. And that's, where I think we really want to watch is just that, how much are we extracting from people versus kind of putting back in. And I know, Mike Lee, you talked about that in your opening statements of just really, it's just not about the Department of Equity. It's not about, it's really about our scholars and about advancing the needs of our scholars, all of our scholars, and with an equity lens. So I just think that I know that we'll be talking about that engagement in our communities, but I just, there's so many, most of the topics we're talking about really do align tonight. And so I think just that sweet spot of where they align and not kind of letting anything fall between the cracks there. Okay, so I am going to just ask if I think we had a really thorough discussion. Does any of the other directors have any other comments, final comments or questions?
Yes, I needed to follow up on the question from Director Douglas on the survey. So do parents actually see the survey or do they just learn about what the survey is intended to do and then choose to opt in or out? Is that something that parents actually see the content for?
Yeah, I am working with Tim Palmatier right now to craft the email. They will not see the actual survey with the items. However, we are going to prepare what the content is so that parents can do that. So that's what I know right now.
Okay.
And Chair Dawson-Walton, maybe I can jump in as we wrap this up. I want to just emphasize the effort we're going to try to do to align this information that we're collecting during a very challenging time, no less, right? To help inform our next steps with our overall strategic planning, and kind of like many of you have said, how do we integrate the efforts? And that'll result as we finalize our strategic directions and our overall strategic roadmap. This is going to be really rich, strong information that can be actionable as we, move into finalizing that, because we have had to slow that process down because of all the COVID related challenges we've been facing. So I want to reassure everyone that that effort is strong in how we integrate what this process can bring to that larger strategic planning effort that we've committed to last year.
Okay, thank you so much. And I really appreciate you keeping the work going during this pandemic. I think it's so important, and all the participants that have been part of this. So thank you so much for your presentation and information. Look forward to hearing more. I'll turn it back over to you, Superintendent McIntyre.
Yeah, this is the Assistant Superintendent Michael Lehan show tonight. So, usually it's the Ron Meyer show with operations, but we gave Ron a break tonight. So it's his one meeting off a year. So our next topic, I'll just turn it right back to Assistant Superintendent Lehan with our mental health and well-being presentation. Thank you.
Good evening once again. This presentation, I will certainly welcome Kate Emmons and her team. And we're looking at and visiting about conditions of wellness within our spaces. This evening, we've talked about equity, and now I introduce the conversation around conditions of scholar and staff wellness. Each of these conversations are intertwined. There is a natural interconnectedness. The professionals you will hear from tonight center our scholars' wellness and position them as caretakers of the human condition. All learning is social and emotional. The people and the individuals you hear tonight are critical to our scholars' success, and you'll hear their passion for their work this evening. I welcome Kate Emmons, Director of Student Services, to welcome her team as they share the critical work they are engaging in and immensely passionate about. Kate?
Good evening, Board Chair Don Walton and board members and Superintendent McIntyre. I'm delighted to be here this evening with you, more so because I'm excited for the opportunity that you get to hear from some of the staff that work directly with students, and I know how important that is to all of you. So without further ado, I'm going to share. I just have to remember where I actually put it, and it's right there. So here's our presentation, and I'm going to start it, and then, can you see it? Thank you. So as we go through, the members who are speaking will just let me know to go to the next slide. So we've entitled this A Community of Care. And by we, I actually mean Jill Lene. She had some surgery, so she is so unfortunately not with you tonight because this is her passion, and she was very unhappy to not be here, but circumstances did not allow her to be. But she is actually watching this. So a shout out to her because this is really her work and her people. They're my people too, but really closely her people. So community of care, mental health and the well-being. Let's see, whoops. All right then, who's switching on me here? So we always start with our mission. So our mission is to inspire and prepare all students with the confidence, courage, and competence to achieve their dreams, contribute to a community, and engage in a lifetime of learning. And as Rev is always telling us to say, each student, not all students. All is an aggregate, and each is a disaggregate. So each student with the confidence, courage, and competence. And that's our goal with our social, emotional, and mental health work as well. For the love of Pete. So we have some outcomes of this presentation. Board members, you will gain a knowledge of our comprehensive scholars wellness service delivery model. We're going to talk about some current observations of scholars' response to current events by our mental health and wellness providers. We're going to discuss some current supports being offered to support scholars, and looking forward into next year, needed supports and departmental strategic thinking. So a full agenda. Now, many board members have seen this before. This is the Minnesota Student Survey. This is just one part. They ask a ton of questions, And this is from 19. We're going to have the opportunity to get information next year. So the questions that were pulled out were, this is the one, students reporting long-term mental health or emotional problems in 2019. And you can see these numbers. What is going to be interesting is when we take the 21 survey to compare it to see what the impact of COVID has been on this. So I'm going to slide through these fairly quickly because you have access to this. And if you have any questions, we'll be happy to spend more time with you on that offline. This is the feeling down or depressed or hopeless in the past. So females more than males, but still a very high. If you look at our 11th grade females, well, I think anything over 50, well, these are high. And in one adverse childhood experiences, we've talked to you about the ACEs study before, and these are high as well. There's a professor by the name of Bruce Perry, and I can provide that. Actually, Beth Gunkel, who is on here somewhere, I got a link from her, and it is a very fascinating webinar. And if you would like to see it, I see Director Jacqueline Mosqueda-Jones nodding her head. She's very familiar with that as well. But this is his work, and this is in factors involved in risk and resilience. And what he has taken a look at is the information that the impact of COVID is having on our students. So students who are in a chaotic, severe, prolonged, uncontrollable environment and have some adversity in their life, and there's some list here, it's not inclusive or exclusive, they have a higher risk of vulnerability. People that have a predictable, moderate, and controllable environment and have some sense of connectedness, and there's some examples there of that connectedness, have typically more resilience. This is the pre-COVID baseline for resilient people. And I'm going to do this is the pre-COVID, the COVID-19 related distress. You see that is moving. So people that are over at the, to the farther right in typical times would have more resilience. And you can see that the line has moved farther to the left for distress. This is the line of distress for students, people, inclusive. I think he did this study on, Beth can correct me, but I think he did this study on students that were devastated. This is devastating to our most marginalized, disconnected, and disenfranchised, the very children and families that we serve. So this is the line of vulnerability. They have moved much farther to the left. I'm not going to do a whole series on Bruce Perry. We can certainly give you that link so you can learn more. I'm going to turn it right over to our fabulous counselors, Jackie Trzynka, Kaylee Herlovsky, and Amy Payton. Is that true?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, I'm going to mute. Let me know when you need me to switch out a slide.
All right, thank you, Kate. Thank you to the board and superintendent for giving us an opportunity to speak with all of you tonight. We're excited to share our work from Student Support Services. So Student Support Services is a tiered approach. We're all working together. We're all different pieces of a puzzle with some different roles, levels of expertise, and things like that. But we are a team that works together collaboratively to provide the supports for our students, our families, and our school communities. School counseling is a comprehensive K-12 program in our district that aligns with the American School Counselors Association standards. Implementation can look a bit different from level to level or from school to school based on specific building needs and allocations. Next slide, please.
Hi, my name is Amy Payton, and I am an elementary school counselor and the elementary counseling lead, and I'm currently serving DOA. When supporting students, the key areas that school counselors focus on are academic, social-emotional, and college and career. Individual counseling, small groups, Classroom lessons and support vary from school to school based on allocation and compensatory buyouts. Counseling groups focus on anxiety, emotion regulation and mindfulness, social skills, family change, classroom survival skills, ninth grade transition groups, Gay Straight Alliance, college career planning, and many more. Many buildings have counselors teaching Second Step and the Zones of Regulation curriculum in the classrooms. Some of the creative ideas we have implemented K through 12 in response to distance learning are counseling websites with calming resources, Schoology small group self-paced lessons, Friday pop-up events, virtual morning hallway connections, lunch groups, information sessions, and standing office hours. Next slide, please.
Hi, I'm Kaylee Herlofsky, and I'm a middle school counselor at both Northview and Osseo Middle. Kate, if you can just go back one slide. Perfect. So we know that in order for a student to be successful, we must focus on the whole child. An important layer to supporting a student is to also support their family. As Jackie stated earlier, school counselors are often the first point of contact for families. Just as important of a role it is for us to advocate for our students, it's equally as important for us to advocate for their families. This can include acting as an advocate for our students and families at a district level and putting their voices and perspectives into the space. It also includes fostering relationships between families and other school staff by serving as the bridge between families and teachers when communicating student needs. Counselors play a key role in providing communication and information regarding transitions between school levels. This includes communicating the registration process, school choice information, program information such as AVID, and assisting in planning and leading family welcome nights and celebrations. School counselors are the 504 case managers for their buildings. They work with students, families, and school staff to create and establish systems and accommodations to support student needs. We support families in crisis a multitude of ways, including providing resources, calling the mobile crisis team when needed, offering a listening ear, and assisting in facilitating difficult conversations that students might need to have with their families. In addition to mental health resources, we also connect families to resources including technology, internet, attendance, meals, and housing. Next slide, please.
School counselors can be found in every facet of the school community, from managing programs like WEB, Link Crew, and other student groups to providing staff trainings in restorative practices, trauma-sensitive schools, and suicide prevention, to serving as a voice on larger building initiatives and committees like crisis teams, PBIS, advisory, and leadership or planning teams. School counselors in many buildings are seen as big impact leaders, often creating school-wide systems to support students, teachers, and families. Another large impact school counselors have on the school community is through supporting our teachers and our educational support staff. The pandemic and change in learning models has not only impacted our students, but also our school staff. Counselors have been working hard to support school staff by providing resources and serving as a listening ear to ensure our fellow educators feel supported so they in turn can support our students. Next slide, please.
School counselors are intentional with their focus on equitable practices by aiming to meet students where they're at every day. We do this by advocating for all students, providing each student with what they need rather than giving every student the same thing. Examples you can see within our K-12 system include groups focused on empowerment and affinity, such as the Sisters of Nia and Brothers of Ujima groups, and utilizing the compass to facilitate conversations with students. We also support staff by helping to create lessons to encourage supportive classroom environments and resources about current events that impact them and those around them, like George Floyd's murder, the protests that followed, and the recent events that took place at the Capitol. Next slide, please.
The last year has been hard on our students, our families, and our school communities. As we discussed as a K-12 counseling team, there were some key areas we observed students were struggling with the most. The first one was isolation. Many students are feeling alone. The combination of not being in the physical school building, extracurricular activities and sports being canceled, and many students unable to see their families or go to public spaces have made students and staff have an overwhelming sense of loneliness. Uncertainty. We know that students experiencing trauma need predictability. The uncertainty of this year has been an added layer of stress for all students, and especially students who have experienced trauma in their lifetime. High school students are hesitant to make firm plans looking toward life after high school and are having to rethink their paths in many cases. The lack of routine and structure the school provides are having a large impact on students' academic and social emotional well-being. Many students are reporting disrupted sleep patterns, which can affect their mood, physical health, mental health, and their ability to focus and concentrate in their classes. This, combined with the increased technology use, lack of activity and movement, and in some cases, lack of adult supervision during the school day, is impacting student success both in and outside of the classroom. Similar to the feeling of isolation, students are really missing their friends. At Northview, we conducted minute meetings the week before moving into the full distance model to ensure that our students were set up for success. One of the questions that we asked was, what has been the hardest thing for you so far this year? An overwhelming amount of students said not seeing their friends and not having that socialization. We know how important that is at every level. This has especially been hard on our 6th graders and our 9th graders who transition to new buildings and our new students to the district that do not have that strong sense of community that they would have experienced during those integral transition periods. Students are struggling to consistently and actively engage in all of their classes, and all students are experiencing grief and loss on some level, whether that's the loss of their old way of life, a loved one, or a friendship. Distance learning is challenging, not only for students, but also for parents. Whether they're working from home or they're working outside the home, they're trying to adjust to being the main supervisor of their scholars while also trying to balance their lives. Some students can thrive during independent learning, while other students find this difficult, leading to a lack of motivation. Without physically being in the building, it's difficult for many students to find the motivation to get up and going on their schoolwork. We're also finding a challenge with early intervention. Students who are struggling academically prior to distance learning are struggling even more. The gap is growing. It is difficult to get students to show up to interventions to get the extra help, and when they fall behind, we're finding it very difficult for them to catch up. In addition to early intervention academic needs, we're also experiencing a challenge in catching and addressing mental health needs early on to really serve as an impact before it evolves into a bigger deal. Next slide, please.
As we're looking ahead and planning for the 2021-2022 school year, our national model and RAMP, which are best practices for all students, are helping us shape and plan our priority work. RAMP stands for Recognize, ASCA, Model, Program, which is similar to National Board Certification for teachers. It is a data-driven evaluation of the effectiveness of the counseling program and its impact on student achievement, attendance, and behavior, with an intentional focus on closing the gap. We work with our administrators and an advisory committee of stakeholders to improve the school counseling program and to meet the needs of every student. We base all program decisions and goals on data. We had 4 schools apply to be RAMP certified this year, and we're hoping to put Osseo area schools on the national map as an effective K-12 school counseling program. Next slide, please.
As Amy mentioned in the previous slide, we're using the American School Counselor Association standards and the RAMP tools to make data-driven decisions for each of our sites. Our big picture priorities on the slide have been identified and continue to evolve through discussions during our school counselor meetings. As a team, we collaborate to identify immediate student needs, share site responses, and then collaborate and problem solve together. We use an equity lens to consider how the pandemic and changes in learning models are impacting our students in different ways, and how we will respond to the varied student needs when we return to a post-pandemic educational setting. During this time, we're also actively working to identify and anticipate the needs for the future. We have time set aside during our counseling meetings each month to further review data and create annual student outcome goals that are used to support students for the remainder of this year and into next year. Examples could include a school-wide program for rebuilding community, lessons to teach, and reteach specific academic skills, a specific small group focus for self-regulation, or a series of interventions to support mental health needs of our students. We know that next year will be challenging for students, families, and the greater school community to transition to a post-pandemic school environment. As a school counseling team and the larger student support services team, we'll be intentional in creating systems of support for each scholar and family to successfully navigate their path in regard to academic, personal, social, and college and career readiness needs. Thank you for your time and attention. Next slide for social work.
Good evening. My name is Kelly Dynas. I'm one of the school social workers in the district. I work at Elm Creek Elementary and Fernbrook Elementary, and I'm also one of the social work department co-leads.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Gunkel. I am also a co-lead for the social work department this year, and I work at Park Center Senior High and for the DLA High School.
So we also wanted to thank you for having us and giving us the opportunity to talk about the ways school social work fits into our district's discussion and planning around mental health and well-being. In District 279, we have social workers at all sites who work with special education students. And in addition to that, some buildings receive allocations or use compensatory funds for general education social work. We wanted to highlight the Minnesota School Social Work Association's mission, which is to promote academic success by reducing social, emotional, economic, and environmental barriers to learning. Next slide, please. As Jackie mentioned earlier, that student support services, we all work together to support students, families, and staff, and we have different ways of doing that. On this slide, we listed some common focuses for social workers in both general and special education. One important focus that we wanted to add is advocacy for students and families, which includes speaking out for underserved students. For example, providing specialized support and resources around issues including race, LGBTQ+, culture, and language. Many of the roles that we listed here overlap with what the counselors described earlier, so I won't read them, but you can look at that and ask us any questions if you'd like to later. Social workers have always collaborated with school staff and our student services teams to support students. When the pandemic hit, we focused on crisis intervention, working to meet immediate student family needs from internet access to food safety to childcare, in addition to maintaining connections with students on our caseloads. The core and foundation of our work didn't really change, but the frequency and intensity of the need has really increased. More students and families are needing more services. Next slide.
So Kelly and I surveyed our department, and what you'll see on the following 3 slides are some of the responses from social workers about different impacts on our students and their families of both social injustice and also the pandemic. So first of all, with social injustice, I think the most common response that we saw was fear. Students were so fearful. A lot withdrew socially. Many felt a sense of diminished confidence. On the other side of the coin, it seemed like students were much more willing to engage in conversations about race and racial injustice, and they seemed more willing and able to speak up when they witnessed injustice, which we took as a positive development, that they were building their confidence to speak out. Next slide, please. With the pandemic, we noticed, you can read through these, but it's very similar to what you'll see from the other groups, I suspect. A lot of students struggle with motivation and focus doing school from home. A lot of students express fear, not just for their own safety, but for their loved ones. Worries about social isolation and just missing physical connection. You know, not getting to sit next to their friends in the cafeteria is a big deal. The disruption of schedules and routines, I think, has been particularly hard for kids. Next slide, please. Grief and loss, as they mentioned. I think the loss of loved ones to COVID is particularly tragic. And for all of us, the loss of a sense of normalcy. I think that we're just beginning to maybe see impacts of that, and I suspect that that's something that we're going to see on an ongoing basis in sort of intangible ways. We know there's been educational challenges with access and navigating technology, and working or doing school remotely was just really hard and didn't work for some kids. On a positive note, we have students and families reporting that the increased time together has been a really positive thing for them. And as staff, we noticed a decrease in behavioral issues at school when class sizes were smaller and kids had more space and more adult attention. So next slide, please. So with the logistical challenges of the pandemic, a lot of social workers, or all the social workers, changed a lot of how we interact with students and families. Social workers who previously might have serviced their students in groups were now meeting with them one-on-one due to the need for social distancing. Social workers collaborated in an increasing sense with staff, sometimes pushing into classrooms to try to locate kids or to get them online with us. Also, some social workers initiated building-wide conversations about race after the social injustice of last summer that came to the forefront. And so we kind of were in a role of trying to facilitate some healing there in that process. A few things I wanted to say about Google Meet and meeting with students over Google Meet. It certainly has had its challenges. I think it just felt weird and different for students, for us too, maybe. I think I'm used to doing meetings this way by now, but it's been different. But I will say that some positives have come out of the Google Meet phone calls. First of all, we're able to meet with students and families and parents at the same time. And that has been a wonderful increase in collaboration and acknowledging parents as an educational partner with us. And so I very much hope that we can find creative ways to continue that after we're able to see kids face to face again. Social workers' offices at schools tend to be very busy with lots of knocks on the door. And so some social workers said it's been really nice to not have interruptions. And so when they're meeting with a student, they can focus 100% of their attention on that student in that moment. And then as a last point about Google Meet phone call or calls, when we are in our offices at school, we are inviting students into our space, and we try hard to make them comfortable, but at the end of the day, it's still our space. So it's been kind of a level playing field with Google Meet phone calls to have each of us entering the other's space. And it's been kind of I don't know, it feels like a privilege when students get to the point that they're comfortable enough that they decide to turn their camera on, and it's no longer just a voice call. I feel like at that point, we've been given the privilege to be invited into their space. And it is so neat to get to see them being their true authentic self in an environment where they feel so comfortable. They introduce us to their pets and their family members that walk by. It's just really a beautiful thing. So next slide, please.
We wanted to share a few highlights of things that we've discovered or tried out that have been successful. And actually, is there a previous slide to that one? Or maybe they got switched around. Yeah, there we go. Thank you. We had to look differently at how we made connections and provided services to students and families. And so these are some of the highlights. The first picture shows a virtual classroom and calming room, which was both fun to create and provided resources that students could access at any time, including guided meditations, calming music, and other relaxation strategies. So a lot of the social workers developed these, and I'm sure other professionals did too, to have a way for students to access resources when we weren't with them. The second picture is a format for a virtual circle, which allowed for continued collaborations with teachers and students, provided social connection, group discussion, and problem solving. Next slide, please. Social workers created virtual lessons and ways for students to access information around mental health and wellness. The first picture is an example of a seesaw lesson that students could complete as part of a virtual discussion. As we mentioned before, virtual meets and courses did not work for everyone. So for some students, it was more assignments to do, more numbers on the seesaw screen, more files to access in the Schoology folders. So a group of high school social workers collaborated to create VIBE, which stands for Voicing Issues Benefits Everyone, to address and mitigate feelings of isolation and voice issues that are impacting all students during the pandemic. VIBE is a cross-district high school project that aims to unite the 4 high schools and allow students to learn from one another through an interactive student discussion panel over a Google Meet. Students also hear from a community member, and themes for each month reflect current events as well as common goals on students' IEPs. The group of social workers that created VIBE got support from 279 Foundation for this project as well. So it was kind of an exciting project. Next slide, please.
Okay, so looking forward, we believe that these are the things that our students and families will most need. First of all, compassion and validation, because let's face it, this has just been really hard, and that's true for everyone. They need to feel safe and connected again. They need physical resources, and I believe that they'll need physical resources on an ongoing basis until families can get back on their feet. We need strategies to address trauma and ongoing mental health support, and then support readjusting to the school environment and intervention and assessment to identify the academic gaps that undoubtedly will occur with the disrupted learning.
Next slide, please. So finally, thinking towards the future, in the past 10 months, students and families have invited us into their homes and lives in ways that hasn't happened before. And we see this as an opportunity for our district to continue our commitment to hearing student voices and creating a school community where students can be their authentic selves, to actively create space for families to participate in planning, to be creative in how we welcome students back and support them in rebuilding relationships and connections at school, to invest in more professional person power to allow time to create deeper relationships, to support all staff by providing professional development and giving them the skills to support student well-being. Social workers are committed to taking what we've learned and using it to work in new and creative ways. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Emily Jouer. I am one of 2 student assistance counselors that serves in the District 279. It's myself, and I work full-time at Park Center High School, and then the other student assistance counselor is Krista Breno. And this image I liked and decided to put up first, in that the thing that we most touch on would be chemical health. So obviously chemical health and mental health go hand in hand. Don't always know which one came first, but either way, consistently working with both. And I look at this image in respect to COVID, and I just feel like most of these things are occurring with everything going on in our society right now. And I just thought when I looked at it that with COVID, with George Floyd, with just the people losing their jobs because of COVID, there is a lot of stress, trauma, mental health, everything. And looking at substance use, not even just with our students, but within family members in the houses that they're in. So you can go to the next slide. So what do we do? So we work with students who are struggling with substance use. This could be, most of our referrals come when we're in school from a student getting a chemical violation in school. That's then sent to us, and we definitely like to make sure that people understand that our role is not disciplinary, but it comes with a therapeutic approach. I'm not there to be any sort of discipline to it. It's to talk about why are we using this as our coping skill. So right now with COVID, we are definitely getting referrals from the community as well as just the relationships that we've built prior to going into distance learning. When we're talking about substance use with kids or mental health, as I said, they go hand in hand. So if I'm talking to a student that maybe back in spring wasn't ready to talk about use, they might be ready to talk about use now, and we'll take those steps to go forward. So it just kind of the relationships that we build from prior to now kind of build. So, and then we obviously are dealing with dual diagnosis. So when we're working with kids, sometimes we get kids because of crisis with mental health and come to find out that they're actually experiencing mental health because they're using chemicals to deal with their mental health. So we work a ton with students on making referrals, hopefully with a dual purpose. So I do a lot of referrals to get a needs assessment done that covers both the mental health and the chemical health aspect to it. And then our assessments that we do following a chemical violation in the school is our own pre-assessment. So when that chemical violation happens and we get that referral in the school, we do a pre-assessment. This is my introduction of who I am. It's where I start my relationship with the student. It's where we start talking about how things are going, and normally it all comes falling out of why this is all happening. And so we do ongoing counseling sessions, one-on-one, motivational interviewing, and a huge part of our position when it comes to chemical use is stages of change. So youth who use chemicals are not going to necessarily be ready for any sort of steps the first time you meet them. So it is a lot of work and one-on-one sessions and meeting with the family and getting everyone on board to get them to a point of making that first step of change. And so that's a huge part of it. There's also the chemical education aspect to it. It's sitting down and talking about it. If they have questions about it, it's getting them to know, you know, all the different aspects of the brain. What are you doing to your brain, or how is it affecting you? Is it affecting your motivation? And the more you talk to students, a lot of times they'll be like, oh yeah, well, actually my motivation for school has really gone down. And they'll start having, you know, lights go off in their head as you're educating them on things. And then ongoing outside referrals. This is a judgment on me and Krista's part that if we feel like a student is still really needing a higher level than us just working with them in the school to see if we can't make some change within the school, it's setting the parents up with the correct steps so that they can get that better level of care. So those are just some of the aspects that we work with. Can you go to the next slide? Sorry. And then we do groups. So Krista, I know, runs the LGBT group over at OSSEO. I do, and so does she, a concerned persons group. These are groups where we run them right now, and when we're in school, of students who are struggling with someone in their life that's using chemicals. So this has been a huge thing with COVID, is that I'm sure people have heard with COVID, you don't have groups and support groups for people who are trying to stay in recovery right now. A lot of it is digital, and for a lot of people, that's not enough. And so the level of relapse right now that's happening in the recovery community is off the charts. And so any parent that might have been in recovery, I'm seeing tons of relapses going on. So it's me talking with the student on, you know, how is that feeling for you? You know, what are your outlets? Because at the end of the day, I don't want them to fall into using the same coping skills as their parents using right now. And so it's kind of giving them a space. So we both do concerned persons group. At Park Center, we do have a formal Alateen group that when we are in person does come in, and they run an Alateen group as well. And then as the education portion, we go in health classes. So we do a ton of education with students who take health classes. I set up the classroom where they can ask me anything, because I am a firm believer, and the more you know, the better choices you can make. And we do guest speaking in different classes with mental health and chemical health. I know I've been in English classes and criminal justice classes just to give more education to students. Most recently, we are going to be implementing it's a collaboration with Hennepin County Public Health on vaping. So when I'm talking to kids over Google Meets, I find that they get a little relaxed and they will hit their vape pen. So I've had it happen probably 5 or 6 times. And so I want them to, and I know that in school that wouldn't happen. So it's just a totally different environment, and coping skills and what's normal has gone out the window. And so we're ramping up more education on the vaping, and we're going to be implementing this awesome program with Hennepin County Public Health that's going to be rolling out in February to just give our kids some more tools so that we're making the best choices and most healthy choices that they can make. That's it. Mine's shorter.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chrissy Zumba. I am the district homeless liaison, and I also work with our students in foster care. my role in the district is to make sure we are identifying students who have lost their housing and they are qualified as homeless under the McKinney-Vento Homeless Act. And then we will let them know, the student and the family, what are their rights and protections under the law and the services that we can provide. Like the free meals, transportation to their school, immediate enrollment, supplies, clothing, community resources, all the wonderful things that everybody has just talked about already today. So starting with my first slide, I just wanted to give you all an idea of who are our students experiencing homelessness in our district. So this is a data survey that we do every year for MDE, and this is looking at last year's numbers. So showing we identified 554 children and youth experiencing homelessness. And then you can see based on that number, the percentage based on race and ethnicity, grade. We also look at two subgroups, English learners and special education, and then the location where when the student was identified, were they doubled up, living with another family member or friends, shelters or transitional housing programs, hotel or unsheltered. Okay, next slide. Okay, so a little bit of what we are seeing. The major thing that we are seeing, and this is going across other districts too, mainly larger districts, is that we have identified about half as many students experiencing homelessness since distance learning began last March. So 554 students we identified last year. But between March and June, it was less than half that we identified during that time. And then that just followed through to the start of this school year. So just looking at a few numbers, the fourth week of going into the school year, this year, 159 students were identified, and last year it was 228. And then at the end of December, last year it was 452, and then this year it's 230. So quite a big difference. Some of the reasons are lack of points of contact within a student's day. So those critical interactions within a student's day that isn't happening because we're distance learning. They walk into the building and the principal says good morning. The front office staff sees them, their peers, their teachers. So since that hasn't been happening, we're not seeing the students that are coming in wearing the same clothes every day, hungry, falling asleep at their desk, not having their homework and their assignments ready, or tardy all the time. And so then we're not able to ask the questions of, hey, what's going on? What's different? So that's one thing. The need for transportation and tracking absences. Those are usually the two most important ways or critical ways that we identify someone experiencing homelessness. Oftentimes they're not getting to school, so they're absent or tardy. And then we make the call and then they say, well, I can't get there because I don't have transportation. So then we are, ask the questions of what's going on. And if it is loss of housing, then we can help with that. So because of distance learning, there's no need for transportation. And then the tracking of absences we do, but it's just been more lenient. Then we have the eviction moratorium. And this is a big one because it'll be interesting when this is lifted, if we're going to have a huge increase in homelessness. But potentially we have families who are unable to keep their housing and pay their rent. But because of this, landlords are not evicting families for non-payment of rent. And then we have students choosing distance learning, our DLA, rather than the option for in-person if it's available. And so therefore we may not be connecting with, they're online, they're doing fine. And so we don't know that maybe they might be in a homeless situation. And then a little bit of why identification matters. Definitely the instability of homelessness we know is important and a major factor meeting educational outcomes. Students and families can't access the extra support that they could if they were under-identified. And then when returning to in-person is an option, knowing who is homeless and highly mobile will help us prioritize and provide transportation to those who are outside of our boundaries in the school. Okay, you can go to the next slide. All right, some other things that we're seeing, definitely an increase in food support. A lot of our families are doubled up, and so there's multiple people living in a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment, lots of mouths to feed, and money's tight, job loss, everything. And so the food has been a big one. Also, we have quite a few families living in hotels, and they can't purchase their food every day. They could go to a food shelf, but they can't make their food in the hotel. So that's been another big one. And then access to internet. We all know we can't do distance learning without internet service. So that has been a big one. I want to say at least half of our homeless students have issues with either connecting to the internet, if they have it, or needing us to provide them a hotspot. This has been a huge barrier to being successful for distance learning. Another one is adequate or safe place to study. I hear a lot from students that they don't have a quiet place to go, or even a safe place. They don't feel safe with living with all the people they're living with, or something like that. And so definitely, and there's no, the drop-in centers are not as free to just drop in and stay. Libraries, you can't go to the library. Rec centers, you can't go there. So that's been a huge barrier. Parents and guardians not engaged. Through distance learning, it seems if a parent is willing to support and help their child be engaged, help their child, then the child is more engaged and more successful. But when you are in crisis mode and homeless, school is not the first thing that's on a parent's mind. And so I think that's a big one too. And then increased number of unaccompanied homeless youth. So these are youth that are on their own with no parent or guardian. And I have definitely seen an increase in the number of our youth that are on their own. A lot of it, again, not feeling safe, so don't want to stay there. Or a lot of arguments with parent or guardian, and they get kicked out. Immediate enrollment. So for families that have become homeless and either are re-enrolling into our district or they're new to our district, once they are identified as McKinney-Vento, we have to bypass some of our requirements. So they don't have to show proof of residency, immunizations, student records, things like that. So our enrollment center staff do an outstanding job of once they're qualified, they mark that enrollment as homeless, and it's pushed through and sent to the school immediately to get that student enrolled. However, with the distance learning and with everything, our new distance learning academy, it's gotten, the enrollment gets to the school, but then it's going to take time to get the Chromebook and the iPad and the materials and things like that. And so some of these students who have, some who may have not even been in school for a month or more, we're not immediately getting them started, but that's kind of what happens. So then looking at services that we are providing. When I think everybody has brought this up, there's a lot of uncertainty right now. And a homeless student, there's always uncertainty, no matter what kind of environment that's going on. And a homeless student so the school becomes the one constant, stable place for that student to go. They know that they can count on that. So for not only learning, but the ability to have breakfast and lunch, and the social and emotional support from staff and peers. So when thinking about the support we want to offer homeless students during this time, we need to think about not just supporting them academically, but also around connection, engagement, and checking in on their well-being. So first of all, I want to talk about the school building homeless point person. So going back a little bit also with the identification. So each school has either a social worker or a counselor who is point person. And this person has been trained and understands McKinney-Vento Act, the services we can provide, and we work together then to identify the students in that school who are homeless. And so this year, definitely, we are realizing I'm sending out more and more like, okay, this is your list of homeless students. You know, are you reaching out? How is everyone doing? So we're definitely doing a lot more engagement and connecting them to all the services that everyone has just talked about. So that's one. And then we have the ability to deliver food, materials, devices, and other supplies to families who do not have transportation. That's a big one. A lot of our homeless families are living outside of our district. They do not have reliable transportation. And so we were able to work with food service, our technology department, and transportation so that we can quickly transport all of these things to where the family is staying. So that has been really helpful and has worked out very well. And then prioritizing homeless students with hotspot devices. So I said access to internet has been an issue. And so working with our technology department to prioritize our homeless students. Because again, a lot of these students, they haven't been engaged, they become homeless, they're not online or in person, and they lose a lot of a week or two or anything like that. So to get them their materials right away and to prioritize our homeless students is just going to help them out even more, get caught up and back engaged. And then promoting engagement through needs assessment. So each student and family will conduct a needs assessment once they're qualified to see what areas are they needing support. So it could be food, clothing, hygiene items, it could be an ear mattress. But many times this is also a way where we can re-engage the family. Like I said, they're stressed out, they're in crisis, they have so much going on, and it can be a huge relief to be able to offer them supplies or support so that they are able to take that off their shoulders and support their child then with school. Tutoring. We are very fortunate to offer tutoring to homeless students. We have funds to pay teachers or ESPs. This is again is a way to get them kids back up to speed and on what they've missed and if they've fallen behind. And then we've been able now since COVID to use this as a way to do a lot of some one-on-one time to engage and make a connection. Community referrals. Through our needs assessment, we can also identify what referrals would be most supportive. So it can be connecting them to, again, the services that we just talked about, or within our community, could be outside counseling, county benefits, shelters, legal aid, things like that. Our district family advocate, Amy Newheisen, her and I work very closely together. So oftentimes I focus on the immediate needs, whether it's transportation, food, school supplies, clothing, things like that. So I'm immediate, and then I can refer them to Amy and she will look more into housing resources, household items, county benefits, things like that. Again, the Enrollment Center and DLA in prioritizing immediate enrollment and access to materials. So definitely working with the schools and Distance Learning Academy on different ways we can prioritize starting our students, homeless students, as soon as possible and getting them the supplies that they need. So, and getting access to all the materials as soon as we can. And then I wanted to mention community support. We have an amazing community that since March especially, they want to help with donations and fundraisers and clothing drives and funds too. And so we have families in the district, we have faith communities, businesses. I've worked a lot with Osseo Lions Club and Osseo Maple Grove American Legion. So I just kind of wanted to do a shout out to all those wonderful organizations because they have really helped out in so many ways to support our families and our students beyond what I could do or what we could do as a district. So that's been amazing help. And kind of looking at the rest of this school year and going into next school year, my focus is going to continue on where are all these homeless students that we're not identifying. How can we make that a priority, and making sure staff are aware of the signs that when we notice the student isn't showing up, whether it's online or in person, are we asking the questions about their living situation? I think we can also look at some other things like 15-day drops and withdrawals, and kind of like, are we asking those questions so that we can identify who's out there? And then continuing the collaboration with staff and different departments within the district to prioritize our homeless students and continue to find creative ways to keep them engaged. That's all I have. Thank you.
So, school board members and Superintendent McIntyre, we have taken over our time. We have just a few other things to go through, but we're going to, unfortunately, not get to spend the kind of time that we would like to on these next slides. So I'm going to ask the future presenters, the few that are left, and I apologize for not taking your time, but there's other agenda items, to just highlight the top highlights of this work to give school board members an overview of what we're doing. And thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure, no problem.
Good evening. My name is Hannah Arafat, and I am an education consultant, and I work for the district to support the district and teachers in the classroom in implementing restorative practices.
And I'm Maya Miliaris, and I work with community mediation and restorative services, and we worked with Osseo Middle and High Schools for the last 5 years to support restorative practices as well. And we're both really grateful for the opportunity to present, even if a short version, tonight.
So I'll just say a very brief introduction of my work. I basically, restorative practices is an indigenous tradition that dates back centuries, has been passed down from generation to generation through teachers. And I have been fortunate enough to have received training and teaching from teachers. And I come into the schools to support teachers as they implement specifically restorative circles, which is a community building initiative in the classroom. So I help teachers and coach them and process with them and with students.
And the organization that I work with in past has done youth work, both building community through the circle process, as Hannah described, or also by repairing harm, and supporting teachers as well. In this year, we've shifted our work a bit so that we are really meeting the needs of schools, and that means sometimes doing one-on-one work with youth and sometimes circle facilitations virtually, and the bulk of our work has been supporting staff. And I'll pass to Hannah for observations.
Sure. Many of the observations that we highlighted have actually been shared many times over. So there's many recurring themes. So I'm not going to go over all of them with you. I just want to highlight, in terms of grief and restorative circles, what we have noticed is that there are not a lot of spaces for students as a class to process grief. And in circles, we have been able to do that. And it's actually been quite moving to see students share their stories around grief and then hear other students say, I can relate to what you're saying, and to really express empathy, to try and comfort each other, and to show compassion. And Kate, you can flip to the next slide. The only other one that I would like to highlight is this idea of students. I have observed that students are much more muted than they are normally, much more subdued, literally muted on Google Meets. But then also in person, even when we were in the hybrid model, they were much more subdued than they usually are. And that the concern of being muted on Google Meets is we have this expression of behavior is communication. And when students are muted, we actually are not receiving a lot of communication about where students are at. And they're less likely to express themselves. In a classroom environment, it took many months for us to get to a point where everyone felt comfortable to express themselves.
And I'll highlight too as well, demotivated students, students that obviously don't know how to navigate the new challenges. We're seeing some lack of energy to moving forward and just shared frustration with the students and the teachers. The other piece that I'd really like to highlight, just as you might not know what I mean by this, creativity and self-care. One of the things we're noticing is that students are finding their own ways of doing self-care, reaching out to social media platforms or doing their makeup or lighting candles, meditation, connecting with ancestral connections or spirituality. And so we're seeing a little bit of that as well. And I'd say next slide.
So I work specifically with two schools, a middle school and an elementary school, and we actually gave a survey to the middle school students about Circle and their experience in Circle. And 92% of the students said that Circles helped them get to know their classmates better, helped them create an environment in which they felt seen and heard, and helped them build a classroom, build stronger relationships with one another in their classrooms. Next slide. So, I mean, our recommendations for moving forward is we have been doing Circle with students in the classroom. Our recommendation is that we would hold, oh, I'm sorry, this is about staff circles. So we also are doing circles with all the teachers in both of the buildings that I am in. Every single teacher has the opportunity to participate in circles, and teachers have expressed that circles have helped them process and manage their own stress and feelings of heavy responsibility in helping students, and they feel a much heavier sense of responsibility this year than in previous years. Next slide.
And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about what CMRS is doing in schools. We've talked a little bit about how we've switched to virtual, and part of that is about keeping those relationships and allowing for consistency through a year where we've been virtual and hybrid. And so just trying to keep that consistency, holding space and keeping conversations and allowing them to, youth to be able to reflect and teachers and staff to be able to really feel a sense of belonging and community. And so the piece that I'd like to really just reflect on here is I could tell you data about how teachers are stressed and how teachers are exhausted and the link between exhausted teachers and the stress that youth feel. But I don't need to tell you that today, right? Because I think we all know that. What we're finding when we have circles for staff and why we've shifted toward that is because they are able to have some space and be their better selves for young people coming into the building. And so I just want to read a couple of quotes that I have from surveys of teachers. They say, "I've learned to take time to breathe and relax the mind and body and release tension. I have a reminder to slow down. The sense of calm and gratefulness is overwhelming in a positive way. I think the idea of slowing down and being more reflective is very important and useful, especially under the current stresses of life right now." So that's just what I want to highlight. Next slide.
So for prioritizing for next year, I would, based on my experiences this year and in past years, but especially given how this year has been, I would recommend that community building circles be really an option for teachers to implement in their classrooms. I guess much more so. And then community building circles at least monthly with staff as well. So with more consistency, I would say.
It's gone from being important to imperative this coming year. And I think that goes hand in hand with the idea of supporting teachers so that they have the training and capabilities to be there for their students in this way as is needed.
Next slide. So I want to just highlight the emphasis on relationship building and socializing and providing space for that in the class. Maya, did you have anything you'd like to emphasize?
Sure, absolutely. I would say just the social emotional learning piece. I know that's a hot ticket item in schools, but the byproducts of circle and restorative practices are that empathy, the ability to connect, the belonging that we so need, that all of us so need after this year. So those are the highlights, I would say.
And I think that's our last slide. Oh, just one more.
Just the last piece here is just having space for courageous conversations for young people. And I think we've touched on that as well.
Thank you so much.
All right, so thank you all. For the services in the district, like you've seen, we have counselors, we have social workers, we have Hannette, who is a contracted service for some of our sites, and then we have school-linked mental health with Lee Carlson was represented tonight. Lee Carlson also provides support groups for our staff, and they have been running full, and as well as school-linked mental health services to our students, along with St. David's and People Inc. And so we have school-linked mental health in all of our sites. And that completes our presentation. And thank you so much for your willingness to pay attention to staff who, as you can tell, are very passionate about their work.
Thank you so much to all of our presenters. I mean, these are topics that, you know, we talk a lot about in our school board meetings, and they're of interest, the mental health of our students. And so what we're going to do is we're going to, given the time, we are going to do one round of questions or comments. And then what we'll do, there'll be follow-up. For sure, board members know they can follow up, and then we will take a 5-minute recess after this for the next two presentations. So I'm going to start with Director Douglas.
Thank you. I am not going to ask any questions at this time. We have received a really abundant information about the programs that we offer and how they're being serviced to our students right now. I think that my biggest takeaway is how critical it is that we have our students face-to-face again so that we can better serve them and meet these needs for them. I feel like that is going to be critical in helping our struggling students, especially our homeless students. I also expect that we will probably see an increase in homelessness after the mandate is removed on evictions. And it is a huge concern for a number of our families and our students in particular. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for all the information. I will probably be sending you each questions, if I further questions, or maybe I'll direct them at Kate, and then Kate, you can decide where they best go. Because I do have a lot of questions, but I really feel like the biggest takeaway is how critical it is that our students return to school so that we can provide these services to them and get touch points where we're connecting with them on a regular and consistent basis to best serve their mental health needs. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Douglas. Director Grady.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It's really helpful to hear all of this going on with the mental health services in our schools. I just have a couple questions. I'm wondering how you're empowering students to ask for help, because I think that that's hard, especially for children to develop the language around their social and emotional regulation. And that also relates to my second question, which is, if there are children that are still having a struggle asking for help, what do our current caseloads look like for our counselors, and are they going to be able to meet that demand, and how are they doing with the demand right now?
I can touch a little bit on the question about students that, like, empowering them to ask for help. As far as like the students that I work with, our students that are really actively involved in their classrooms, a lot of times the referrals that I'm getting, or the things that I'm getting, are that teachers are checking in with students and they're answering questions in a fashion that is a little bit like a cry for help. It's like, answer this question in your check-in, but they throw in something else that's like, I'm really stressed and sometimes I don't want to be here. Or, there's just little things like that that kind of perk a teacher up, and then they can sort of funnel it to the appropriate person. So I think it's complimenting them when they kind of go out on a limb with their person that they're most comfortable with, which might be a teacher, and just encouraging them that whoever it is, and this is what I always say to students, is that it doesn't matter who it is. It can be a coach, a teacher, whoever you're comfortable with. You let us know how you're doing, what you need, and then we can get you connected to the right person. I don't know if that answers it, but that was what came to mind.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Director Grady. Director Mosqueda Jones.
I just want to follow up on Director Grady's question about how are we doing for caseload and if we're seeing an uptick in needs. You know, where are we falling? Are we going to be missing kids or what's up?
I can take that unless Kate, you want to speak to that one?
Oh, go ahead, Jackie. You give it your first shot.
Okay. So the American School Counselors Association recommends 250 students to every counselor. So that's the recommended ratio. Elementary, based on kind of last year's ratios, was allotted 1 to about 1,100. It came down a tiny bit with the addition of some elementary school counseling support. Middle school is about 680, and high school is about 490, 489.
And to further that, we are one of the very few school districts that have counseling in our elementaries. So our allocation for counselors is spread out through our entire system so that all students would have access to counseling services. So social workers as well. Many of the social workers are designated for special ed services only. They're paid by special ed funds to address needs of students on IEPs. And the district has used compensatory funds to provide more social work services or extra social work services for students in our general ed population to our secondary sites. With the flex of compensatory dollars, that's going to be seen, like how we're going to be able to use it. We have asked for a strategic priority for more social work services, and we could always, as anybody else could say, we could use more fourth grade teachers, we could use more counselors, we could use more social workers. So it's not like we don't have resources, it's how we're choosing to deploy them. And it is a choice here to decide how will we best utilize our budget to meet our district mission. So Jackie's ratios were correct.
And I'm so grateful. Sorry, Kate.
So I was just going to give you the ratios for social work, but I don't need to do that. Go ahead.
I'm just so grateful that we do have a K-12 counseling program because we work in alignment with each other. And research has shown that students who have elementary counselors are 26% more likely to graduate from high school. And so it's the building of the skills and that tier 1 where we get into those classrooms and we teach the skills and we teach mindfulness and we teach emotion regulation. And we do that in conjunction with our colleagues in the building as well. And we just have felt fortunate to have some of us. But again, 1,100 to 1. Some schools have a counselor at 0.4. Some have one at 1.0. And that's true of other departments as well.
So thank you. I'm not going to ask a lot of questions. I think the presentations were very thorough. I appreciate it. As most of you know, mental health is near and dear to my heart. I'm hoping to see more data on the restorative circles since that's piloting in 2 areas. And anecdotally, I've heard some pretty wonderful things. So if I could get some of that, at a later date, I would appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Mosqueda Jones. Director Simons.
I have a number of questions, but I will take those offline as follow-ups. I think to me, it's really compelling information about the need to prioritize in person for our students to be able to support them in the right way that they need to be supported, and the challenges that are going to come ahead of us, to be well prepared for that and ensure that we've got the resources and plans in place when we come back this year and into next year. I think this is such great foundational information, and I would love to see this be able to be available, maybe each of your presentations on the website, so that parents can access this and have a good understanding of it. It sometimes gets buried when it's in school board meetings. So I think this could be really helpful education for our entire district. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Simons. Director Brooks.
Yes. So first, I just want to say I have been eagerly awaiting this presentation, and you all delivered. And I actually wish we had more time because I do have a lot of questions for you. But to piggyback off of Director Grady's comments regarding empowering our students to ask questions, I noticed that the numbers presented at the beginning of the presentation were low for males. And so I'm just wondering if that information is truly accurate. I know that's based off of, what they fill out on a survey, but is that also what you're seeing in the buildings? And how are we ensuring that we're actually making contact with everyone that needs help?
So I can talk to, again, this is Kate, about the Minnesota Student Survey. And what we have is data over time with that. So again, the 1 year in and of itself, like Tom Watkins is on here, and his brilliant mind can really give you a synopsis of that. But we do have a lot of eyes and ears in our schools, including our teachers. We have problem-solving teams, child study teams, admin teams, teachers that care about kids. And I forget, was it me, maybe Emily, who said if the teacher you're answering differently, our teachers are eyes and ears. I mean, we have to give them a lot of credit for knowing the students with whom they work. And really, a lot of it either comes from a parent who calls in and says, there's just something, or a teacher who goes, there's just something. And so then we turn it over to our experts and they follow up with it. And then we have a team who, like the problem solving team, who sits down and considers a lot of information about that student.
I do want to mention that your question about men or boys coming forward and just like the numbers, just from my personal experience at Park Center, I would agree that I feel like men feeling more comfortable coming forward. I know me and Elizabeth work a ton together, that I feel like a lot of times women are just more comfortable. I think it's an ego thing, or just like a comfortable, like, I don't know, we can all agree that in society, a man going to therapy or a man going and asking for help is just not as accepted, or there's a lot of stigma with it. So I know, I do see what you're saying at Park Center. And I can only speak for Park Center, but I will say also that our reaction or our response to that, our administrators put together a group, and it's for like our young male youth, and it was going when we were in person, and this just kind of speaks again to our need to be kind of back giving these kids the supports that they need. But Al Nolan at Park Center has a youth group for men that he put together, and it was a stay after. And I know Paris Kyles, he's our other admin, that they stay after school with boys, men, I keep calling them men, they're all of the above. But they stay after, they provide snacks, they provide water, they sit and do homework, they might talk about a topic. And to me, that needs to grow. And I'm not sure if other schools are doing that, but to me, that is something that is pivotal to make those numbers that we see change with our men. And I do agree, and that is concerning when you look at that men are still not feeling that welcome to go ask for help. But I will say from my experience, when I can get a boy in my office and I can tell that something's up and we actually sit down and talk, it will open floodgates. But it takes you a while to like have them come in. It takes 3-4 times for me sometimes to be like, I have granola bars, I have crackers, and they will come in it's always, I mean, food, I'm telling you. And they'll come in and then eventually it's like, okay, she's consistent. She's still here. She's still asking about me. And then eventually it turns into a sit down session. So I think there's more of what more needs to happen with groups like that, because I do think that it would be a safe space for that to grow.
And going just off of what Emily said, you know, I think when we talk about ratios and relationships, I'm coming from like a Northview lens where our principal uses compensatory dollars to buy up counselors. So our ratio is generally around like 1 to 200. And so I know every single student in my grade level that I'm assigned. And with that, and with those relationships that I have built, every year our counseling department starts the year with a needs assessment. And it goes out to all students with a multitude of questions, and they know that their responses are going to come to me. So I actually have a high number of male students that will answer pretty, clearly on there that they're needing support in different areas, because they know that somebody they trust is going to follow up with them and provide support and have those conversations with them. So that's just one layer. And I know it's going to differ from building to building and from different departments, but we have found huge success utilizing this needs assessment when they know that the information they're sharing is coming only to us, and that they know that we have their best interests in mind with how we're going to handle that information.
Thank you. And I need to squeeze one more in. I apologize to my fellow board members, but I think this one is for Christine Zimba, or whoever can answer it. You talked about foster children and homelessness, and even mentioned the eviction moratorium. So my question is, as we are transitioning back into in-person learning, I know that you mentioned all of the various resources that we work to provide those scholars, but how are we actually working to advocate for them academically, knowing that academics is really the last thing on their mind and probably will be even after getting settled? Yeah, so I guess I'll just leave it there. That's kind of my question.
And that probably would be something for the schools to answer, because I am doing more of the connecting them. And then once they're in the schools, they're providing the one-on-one services there. So I don't know.
And for whoever can answer, I think I'm looking for more outside of, an IEP or a 504, just how we're sort of approaching those scholars.
Are you talking specific homeless or just any homeless and foster?
Yeah, specifically homeless, but I mean, all of those children are in a state of crisis and transition. So,
and I think it's looking at the student and then the entire family and kind of getting a picture of their lived experience of what's going on, and how we can support the student and the family. Academically, definitely, like I mentioned, the tutoring is so important. And I really am happy we have the funds to be able to pay our teachers extra to do this. So that's a big one. And yeah, I don't know if anyone else has any.
I can jump in. So something that came to light, even just in our meeting this morning, is there's a homeless student that I work with, and he kind of fell off the radar. It's because he's couch hopping right now. And like you said, like when a student is like this, how do we, I think your question is like, how do we rein them in, or what are we doing for them? And I think one of the main things that I think is super important is to stress to whoever these students are that are being highly affected with homelessness right now, is that graduation doesn't go away. And that I think it's a conversation of, it's not a race, and you will get there, and this is how you're going to get there, and these are your options to get there. Because a lot of them that I have conversations with, it feels like because all of this, like they're in fight or flight, they're in like crisis mode, like survival mode. When things settle down a little, they do reappear and want to do school. So it's the encouragement, it's the motivation, it's bending over backwards, it's connecting with teachers and saying like, you know, what can we do? What can we bend for this kid? Is there assignments that are pivotal? Are there ones that we can throw out? Just, you know, like, I just think of each student is different, but at the end of it, each kid can graduate. It's just like, how are we supporting them in doing so? And for this student, and he thought he was like not going to graduate, and I told him, you know, we have OALC, we have different ways for credit makeup, and I don't know that they always know that, and even just having that conversation, it gives them something to push forward. So I don't know if that answers it completely, but I think it's a conversation and showing them this is what you can do and you can chip away at it. And it doesn't mean you don't graduate. It might mean that you graduate this time instead of this time, and just encouraging them.
That answered it. Thank you. Thank you both.
Okay, well, I, really have more comments. Our whole entire world has changed. And we're all navigating through this space. And we don't even know yet the lasting impacts that COVID has on our scholars. And so I really think that this was a very thorough presentation of all the different programs and services and opportunities that we have for our students, and to really develop the support, but also to teach like the critical thinking skills too, and self-advocacy in times of uncertainty. And I know that I was able to be part of Amy's ramp advisory council, and one of the things that really struck me at a young age is to really pull out those hidden voices of students that we may not quite miss because of just because they're not, going to just maybe see, show signs or anything like that. And so I think that building that and that love of education and support is so important. And I also look at like Emily, I see, I know social media, our school district community has been so supportive, and, the Groceries on Wheels that you started, connecting families and transportation to groceries so they don't have to struggle with rent and, all this. And our community really came and rose to the level to support that. And I love the restorative justice model. I was a former restorative justice facilitator. So all of this is so amazing. And, I think as we continue to refine and revise our strategic priorities, Superintendent McIntyre, I know you talked about that too, of how we can start to really incorporate this work. And I know, Director Simon said he was just posting it like the, PowerPoints on our page, but to really incorporate that into our work, and as we return to in-person learning. Superintendent McIntyre, Leanne, did you have anything to add before we take a 5-minute recess?
I guess I would just echo what you just mentioned, Chair Dawson Walton, that there's a lot of work happening, a lot of needs to meet that we're really working hard to try to do. And there's just so much support that needs to be provided right now around all these areas. And, and there's other areas in our district along that would be a companion to this, other services in our system too. So I really wanted to say thank you to all of our staff who stuck with us so late tonight to tell the story about kind of what we are facing right now, and how you're trying to do your work in a totally different way than you ever have before, and finding new creative ways and innovative ways to meet the needs of students and with the realities that we're facing currently. So thank you so much for your time and efforts in sharing that with us tonight.
Okay, well, thank you. And it is 9:17, so we will take a 5-minute recess and come back at 9:22 for the last two items, World of Best Workforce report and a learning model update. Thank you. Okay, thank you. We are back now to finish the last two items of the work session. So the World's Best Workforce Report is up next.
Corey, I didn't know if you were going to say anything. Sorry, Superintendent.
Jump right in, Michael. Yep.
Okay,
Just jump
fantastic.
right in. Thank you.
Good evening. It's me once again, though. With me this evening are Jeremy Willie, Director of Learning and Achievement, Tom Watkins, Jenna Johnsoy Aristed, Coordinators of Data and Assessment for the Department of Learning and Achievement. Next slide, please. This evening, the outcome of our presentation is to examine various data points related to Osseo Area Schools' World's Best Workforce Strategic Plan for the 1920 school year. As each of you knows, we have been in a variety of learning models since last year, which has interrupted our traditional schooling experience and traditional ways in which we have assessed continuous scholar growth. As such, within this presentation, you will see different methodologies as we begin to make meaning from the data we have. We continue to be reflective of our work and stay committed to creating conditions so we emerge from this reality more resilient and with greater capacity to improve. At this time, I welcome Jeremy Willie, Director of Learning and Achievement. Jeremy?
To begin our conversation around this work, we wanted to highlight the connection between our newly adopted or our newly developed strategic directions as a part of our strategic planning efforts over the course of the last year and World's Best Workforce goals and legislation. As we look at a multitude of data points, it is important that we begin by grounding us in the statutory requirements related to World's Best Workforce legislation. The 5 World's Best Workforce goals, which you can see listed here, are as follows. Each student is ready for kindergarten. Each third grader can read at grade level. Each student graduates from high school. Each student is ready for college and career. And the achievement gap is closed on all state mandated measures. Each year, school districts are required by the state to submit a World's Best Workforce plan and to share this information in a public meeting. This plan was due for submission on December 15th, 2020. It was submitted on time, and it can be found on our district website. Here you will see the 6 adopted strategic directions for Osseo area schools, which we will focus on throughout our presentation this evening. The student academic experience, academic excellence for all students, closing or eradicating racial and other educational gaps, stakeholder engagement, operational excellence, financial structure and enrollment planning, and enhancing support and creating a system of shared accountability and partnership. While the final 2 strategic directions may not have a specific connection to the information shared in this presentation, the connections can be made between the first 4 and the aforementioned World's Best Workforce goals. These connections will be highlighted throughout the remainder of this presentation where applicable. Before we share specific data points related to World's Best Workforce goals, we wanted to begin by providing you with some contextual information around the demographic trend and makeup of the student population in Osseo area schools. This first graph is a representation of our demographic trend over the past 12 years. The y-axis shows the percentage of total enrollment that each group accounts for. The blue line represents our students of color. The red line represents our free and/or reduced meal students. The yellow line represents our special education students, and the green line represents our English learners, or EL students. While both our special education and multilingual student populations have remained stable over time, our students of color have increased. Free and/or reduced meal students have increased overall from 2009 to 2017, but in recent years, a noticeable decline has occurred. Here you will see screenshots from the report card from the Minnesota Department of Education website. This shows a more specific racial demographic breakdown of our student populations. These 2 images show student counts in percentages of group populations relative to the total number of students in our system. This information is based on October 1st enrollment for the most recent year available. In this case, it would be last year, the 2019-2020 school year. The first World's Best Workforce goal that we'd like to highlight in this presentation is each student is ready for kindergarten. Our next slide shows the pre and post assessment achievement data for pre-K students in our system using the Teaching Strategies Gold or TS Gold assessment. This assessment is designed to provide us with information regarding the extent to which pre-K students are ready for kindergarten. It measures early literacy, early numeracy, and social emotional skill development. You will notice that the lighter blue bars show the pre-assessment percentage of proficiency, while the post-assessment bars indicating proficiency are shown in a darker blue. One point to mention is that in 2016-2017, the pre-assessment was administered in the winter of that school year, while in the following 3 years it was administered early in the fall. This additional learning helps explain why the pre-assessment percentage was higher than in subsequent years. Additionally, another point to mention is to note that post-assessment results from 2019-2020 were not available as we were unable to administer this assessment due to the pandemic and subsequent school closures. Lastly, please note in the box in the bottom left-hand corner of this slide, as referenced at the onset of the presentation, this World's Best Workforce goal and data point connects to each of these 3 strategic directions.
In this presentation, we're offering some new data on elementary course grades that we've not reported on before, so we should consider this baseline data. This is what each of the marks mean. 4 is excellent, exceptional, or extended. 3 is proficient, consistent, or accurate. 2 is basic, simple, or inconsistent. And 1 is limited or insufficient evidence. An NA means the standard was not assessed, or there was a lack of attendance or engagement. And this analysis includes all students enrolled since October 1 of 2020, and it excludes NA marks if most students in the school, course, and grade were marked NA, because we see this as an indication that these standards were not assessed. And color coding compares all groups on the same row. We're reporting 3 indicators of the level to which students were ready for kindergarten. The first row in each table is the most minimal level, the percent of kindergartners who demonstrated attendance and engagement to be assessed on standards. The second row is the percent who did work at least at the basic, simple, or inconsistent level in each of their courses. And the third row in each table is the percent that were proficient or excellent in all of their courses. The color coding helps us see that white students achieved rates that were well above the other groups, especially when we look at percent proficient or excellent. At this level, in the all marks 3+ row, we can see that 5 groups have rates that are less than half the rate for white students: Black, Hispanic, special education, students receiving free meals, and English learners or EL students. Again, these are baseline data collected during the pandemic, so these percentages should increase significantly in the future.
The second World's Best Workforce goal that we would like to highlight in this presentation is each 3rd grader can read at grade level.
On this slide, we can see the results of the 1920 Winter FastBridge assessment. FastBridge is our newly adopted early literacy screener and benchmark assessment and is given in the fall, winter, and spring. Last winter was the first assessment window in which this assessment was widely given. In this chart, we can see 2 pieces of information. The first are the blue bars, which represent the percent of students whose scores indicate they are at low or very low risk for needing reading intervention within our multi-tiered system of supports, or MTSS. The second are the yellow bars, which show the percentage of students whose scores indicated they are projected to be on track for proficiency on the MCA reading assessment. One takeaway from these data is that being low risk for needing intervention does not necessarily mean a student is on track for meeting state standards as measured by the MCA. One other thing I'd like to note is that kindergarten assessment is different than the assessment used at grades 1 through 5. Kindergarten students take the early reading assessment, while grades 1 through 5 take the curriculum-based measurement for reading assessment.
On this next slide, you'll see that we'll begin looking at our Minnesota Comprehensive Assessment, or MCA, results. Despite the fact that MCA testing did not occur in the spring of 2020, we wanted to provide you with a brief overview of our most recent level of performance as compared to the state in each of our 3 grade band ranges and content areas. This graph shows the percentage of proficiency for elementary overall. This would be 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade students in the areas of reading, mathematics, and science. The gold bar on the left column of each of these 3 content areas shows our percentage of proficiency in Osseo area schools. The dark purple bar on the right column of each of these 3 content areas shows the state's percentage of proficiency overall. As you can see, Osseo area schools was approximately 4% below the state average in reading and math, and approximately 12% below the state average in science. Please note, only 5th grade students take the MCA in science at the elementary level. Finally, as we consider this data and the data on the following 2 slides, it is important to note the connection between this goal and 3 of our strategic directions: the student academic experience, academic excellence for all students, and closing or eradicating racial and other educational gaps. At this point in the presentation, we'll be transitioning into MCA results from our middle schools. This graph shows the percentage of proficiency for middle schools overall. This would be 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students, again, in the areas of reading, mathematics, and science. As you can see, Osseo area schools was approximately 4% below the state average in reading, 7% below the state average in math, and approximately 12% below the state average in science. Please note, only 8th grade students take the MCA in science at the middle school level. Finally, let's take a look at MCA results from our high school level. This graph shows the percentage of proficiency for high schools overall. This would be 10th and 11th grade students in the areas of reading, mathematics, and science. As you can see, Osseo area schools was approximately 2% below the state average in reading, 8% below the state average in math, and approximately 6% below the state average in science. Only 10th grade students take the MCA in reading, only 11th grade students take the MCA in math, and students completing biology take the MCA in science at the high school level.
The third world's best workforce goal that we'd like to highlight in this presentation is each student graduates from high school. The top section of the table contains 4-year graduation and dropout rates for the last 7 years, as reported by the Minnesota Department of Education in 2020. These are also called on-time graduation and dropout rates. We anticipate receiving results for the class of 2020 sometime this spring. I think we can all appreciate the personal and professional stakes associated with graduating from high school, ideally on time. This is perhaps our most fundamental equity indicator. Researchers also tell us that each new graduate confers a net benefit to taxpayers of about $144,000 over the graduate's lifetime. You can see that when we add our 4-year graduation and dropout rates together, it's only about 90%. That's because at that point, about 10% of our students were continuing in high school or had unknown status. One strength is that the district had a higher graduation rate than the state for each of these years. We were about 5 percentage points above the state in 2014 and are currently about a half a point above. The district had a lower dropout rate than the state for all but 2019, the most recent data available. So this is our first challenge. In the bottom section of the table, we're looking at 7-year rates, which is the status of students 3 years after their typical on-time graduation year. At this point, when we add up the graduation and dropout rates, we can see that only 2 to 5% of students are still continuing or are unknown. As we saw with the 4-year rates, our district 7-year graduation rates have remained above the state average for each of the past 7 years. For most of these years, Osceo's 7-year rate has been above 90%, and the statewide average has not achieved that rate once. However, our second challenge is that our 7-year dropout rates have also been above the state average for all but one of these years, indicating that after 3 years of additional efforts to engage students and help them complete their graduation requirements, about 8% of our students have dropped out. In order to better understand how our students are doing, we'll review the 4-year graduation and dropout data for the class of 2019 released by the State Department of Education as part of the North Star State Accountability System. 3 large districts in Minnesota are the most comparable to Osseo in terms of the demographics of the students served: Bloomington, North St. Paul, Maplewood, Oakdale, and Robbinsdale. By looking at how specific student groups perform relative to these districts, we get a better understanding of our strengths and challenges. First, we can use the color coding to see that in all 4 districts, Asian, white, and female students consistently had the most favorable graduation and dropout rates. We can also see that the least favorable rates were for homeless students and SLIFE students, which are students with limited, interrupted formal education. SLIFE students are an important subset of English learners. Second, when we look at Osseo students, we can see that our overall graduation rate is within 1/10 of a percentage point of the best rate among the 4 districts. However, our dropout rate is clearly the highest among the 4 districts and almost twice as high as those of higher performing districts, underscoring a challenge that we identified relative to the state rate. Third, the student groups in Osseo with the lowest graduation rates in 2019 were SLIFE, homeless, American Indian, multiracial, special education, and Hispanic. Fourth, the student groups in Osseo with the highest dropout rates in 2019 were SLIFE, homeless, multiracial, Hispanic, EL, and students receiving free or reduced price meals. Finally, our district has the largest gender gaps, with female students 8% more likely to graduate on time and half as likely to drop out as male students. This means that it's important for us to break the racial and service groups out by gender. We can see that some of our smallest groups became too small to report at this level when we disaggregate by gender within race and service groups. Female and male, Asian and white students had the highest graduation rates and lowest dropout rates. The lowest graduation rates were for male students who were American Indian, homeless, multiracial, or Hispanic. Female homeless students also had a very low rate. The highest dropout rates were for male students who were multiracial, Hispanic, homeless, receiving free or reduced price meals. Female homeless students also had a high dropout rate.
The fourth World's Best Workforce goal that we'd like to highlight in this presentation is each student is ready for college and career. Before we get into the ACT data, it's important to provide context about our planned administration for the spring of 2020. Due to the COVID-19 school closures, we were unable to, as a district, offer the ACT assessment. However, students did have the option to take the assessment on their own or during the fall of 2020 at a school site. Because of these changes in ACT administration, the data resulting from the assessment is not consistent with previous years, and trend data will not be available. Now we will take a look at the ACT college readiness benchmark information for the 2020 graduates by test subject and compared to the state. The blue bars within this chart indicate the percent of district graduates that met the ACT benchmark for each subject. The yellow line that extends beyond the blue bar indicates the percent of students statewide who met each subject ACT benchmark. The bar furthest to the right within the chart indicates the percent of students that met all 4 subject benchmarks within the district compared to students statewide. We can see from this chart that district graduates generally trail the state rate by 8 to 11%, with the largest difference being in math, which was an 11% difference. The smallest gap between district graduates and the state is the percent meeting all four benchmarks, which shows district graduates at 6% lower than the state. This slide shows advanced placement or AP course enrollment, as well as the percent of students taking and passing each course's AP exam. We'll start on the left and look generally at the AP exam passing rates over time, and then we'll move on to looking at the table on the right for course-specific information from the 2019-2020 school year. When we look at the chart to the right, we can see the percentage of exams where students earned a 3 or better. AP exams are scored on a scale of 1 to 5, and 3 is generally accepted as a passing score. Students who achieve a score of 3 or better will likely have that credit accepted by a higher education institution. This is true generally, and we know that some institutions and departments within those institutions require scores of 4 or 5 to be accepted as a transfer credit. When looking at the percentage of exams scored as 3 or higher, we can see the rate remains relatively stable over the last 3 years, ranging from 61 to 65%. This does not mean that 61 to 65% of AP course credits were able to be transferred to an institution of higher education, because students do have the option not to take the exam. So what this statistic tells us is that 61 to 65% of the students who opted to take the exam were potentially able to transfer those credits. We'll take a closer look at the percent of students taking the exams in the table to the right. First, when we take a look at this table, in the first column, we can see the name of the AP course. The next column shows the number of students who continue to be enrolled in the course by trimester 3, or the last trimester in the case of a 2-trimester course, during the 1920 school year. The next or third column shows the percent of students enrolled who opted to take the AP exam for that course. The fourth column shows the percent of students who passed the exam with a score of 3 or better. And the final column shows that same statistic at the national level. The color coding within the table shows higher numbers in green and lower numbers in red. When we look at courses like AP US History and AP Stats, we have 70% and 50% of students enrolled in the course who then decided to take the exam. Of those who took the exam, only 47% of the students passed with a score of 3 or better. This is significantly lower than the national rates of 68 and 63% passing. On the other hand, AP World History, AP Spanish, AP Physics, Mechanics, and AP Art 2D all have relatively high rates of students opting to take the exam, high rates of passing ranging from 74 to 90%, and are outperforming students nationally in terms of passing rate. Next, we'll take a look at all college credit bearing course data. Specifically, we'll look at post-secondary enrollment options, or PSEO, AP, college in the schools, or CIS, and concurrent course enrollment and offerings over time. The first chart on the left shows the percent of students in grades 9 through 12 that were enrolled in one of the 4 aforementioned types of college credit bearing courses. When looking at these data over time, we can see a slight decline in enrollment in these types of courses, going from 53% in 1718 to 48% in 1920. The chart on the right shows the number of college credit-bearing courses offered at each high school. Although these numbers are somewhat dependent on registration numbers or the number of students interested in taking the courses offered, we can see some general trends when looking across high schools. We can see the number of offerings remains relatively flat at Maple Grove Senior High and Park Center Senior High. We can also see that the number of offerings at Osseo Senior High has trended upward and increased by 22% over the last 3 years. On this slide, we'll take a look at, there we go. There, okay. I think we maybe need to go back one slide. There we go. Thank you. On this slide, we'll take a look at PSEO course-specific enrollment and student outcomes. In the chart on the left side of the slide, we can see the number of students enrolled part or full-time in PSEO courses. In the chart on the right, we see the student grades earned in the PSEO courses. A large majority of students, 75 to 83% across years, are earning grades of B- or better. Very few students, 4 to 8%, have failed PSEO courses in the last 3 years. These data show that students who enroll in PSEO courses are likely to be successful in terms of course grades. We will look more closely at who is taking PSEO courses in an upcoming slide. Here we see the average number of credits attempted versus how many credits were earned among high school students. We can see that the number of credits both attempted and earned across the past 3 years has remained stable, although there is a smaller proportion of credits earned during the 2020 school year than in previous years. Differences in credits attempted versus earned can be seen when we disaggregate these data by race and ethnicity, which we'll take a look at on the next slide. When we look at the credits earned versus the credits attempted data by race and ethnicity over time, we can see differences across groups. We can see that Asian students generally attempt slightly more credits than other groups. Another trend across years is that Asian and white students are earning a larger proportion of credits they attempt than other student groups. One other piece of information to note is, as we saw in the district level data, students earned a smaller proportion of credits they attempted during the 1920 school year than they have in past years. The exception to this statement is that white students earned a similar proportion of credits attempted as in previous years.
Here we're comparing graduates from the classes of 2019 and 2020 within each student group to see higher education enrollment before and during the COVID pandemic. White, female, and Asian students had the highest rates of higher education enrollment in 2019 and 2020. 5 groups had higher education higher education enrollment rates that were below 60% for one or both years: American Indian, Hispanic, EL, students receiving free or reduced price meals, and special education. 5 groups had an increase in higher education enrollment or had a reduction that was less than the nationwide drop of 4%. These groups were American Indian, Asian, multiracial, and female students. Hispanic, EL, and special education students all had a drop in higher education enrollment in 2020 that was twice as high as the national average. When we look at gender within other student groups, we can see that in all but 2 student groups, our female graduates in the class of 2020 were much more likely than males to enroll in college. The gap favoring females was 20% or higher for American Indian, Asian, and homeless graduates, and 13% or higher for Black, Hispanic, white, students receiving free or reduced price meals, and for special education. The 2 groups in which male graduates were more likely to enroll in college were multiracial students and EL students.
The 5th and final World's Best Workforce goal that we like to highlight in this presentation is the achievement gap is closed on all state mandated measures. First, we will look at information about students meeting ACT college readiness benchmarks, as we looked at earlier, but this chart shows only rates of students meeting the benchmark in all 4 subjects, disaggregated by race and ethnicity. Again, the rates of District 2020 graduates are represented by the blue bars, and the state is represented by the yellow bars in the chart. 2 years of data have been shown to examine differences that may have occurred during the COVID-19 school closure. This chart shows large gaps between student groups and the rates of students meeting all 4 college-ready benchmarks. This gap is consistent across years. One insight this chart provides is that within most groups, students statewide have higher percentages of meeting all 4 ACT benchmarks than district graduates. This is true except for among white district graduates, who are slightly higher than the state percentage both years. Another insight is that there's a large gap between white students and students of color, particularly when comparing the rate of white students to Black students. We see gaps of 35 and 31% in meeting all 4 ACT benchmarks. Lastly, these data show that gaps in meeting all 4 ACT benchmarks between students of color and white students are larger for district students than students statewide, due to rates of white students being higher than the state and rates of students of color being lower than the state. On this slide, we'll look again at 2020 graduate ACT data, but this chart shows average ACT scores by race and ethnicity. We see similar trends in these data as in the benchmark data, with white students earning slightly higher average scores than the state average, and students of color scoring slightly lower than the state average. We also see similar gaps between the average scores of white students and students of color, with the largest gaps being between white and Black students, a difference of 6 points, and white and Hispanic students, a difference of 5 points. Now we'll switch gears and take a look at AP exam scores by group. In the chart on the left, we can see the percentage of students earning scores of 3 or better by SPED status and free or reduced price meal status over time. These data show us that the rate of students receiving special education services and earning a 3 or better on the AP exam declined sharply in the 2020 school year. Among students receiving free or reduced price meals, the rate of earning a 3 or better on an AP exam is consistent across years, but is also the lowest across all student groups. On the chart to the right, we see the rates of earning a 3 or better by race and ethnicity. A positive finding is that American Indian students have been trending upward across the last 3 years. The remaining groups stay relatively stable across years, but we do see gaps in student achievement similar to the trends we saw in the ACT data. We can see the rates of earning a 3 or better are highest among white students and lowest among Black, Hispanic, and multiracial students, with a gap in 2020 ranging from 18 to 24%. Here we'll take a look at which students are enrolling in college credit-bearing courses over time. One positive finding within these data is that although there is still a gap between student groups, the gap is less pronounced than in the data we've seen so far. We do also see that most groups have shown a steady decline in the percent of students enrolling in college credit-bearing courses, which is the same trend we saw in the district level data. This slide shows the enrollment of students over time in full or part-time PSEO courses by student race and ethnicity. We can see that approximately 80% of students enrolling in these courses are white and Asian, and this is consistent across years. These results are particularly interesting when we compare these data to enrollment in all college credit-bearing courses, where we see more equal representation across student groups. Here we can see the full-time and part-time enrollment in PSEO courses by gender and by free or reduced price meal status. In the chart on the left, we can see that female enrollment in PSEO courses has outpaced male enrollment and is trending upward from 2018 to 2020. In the chart on the right, we can see the percentage of students receiving free or reduced price meals and enrolling in PSEO courses is very stable over time, with about 30% representation across all 3 years.
This is a new chart that combines graduation, dropout, and higher education enrollment data. We're looking at the education attainment status of the class of 2019 in the year following on-time graduation from high school, which was the 2019-20 school year. Overall, we can see that over 60% of students that were in the class of 2019 graduated in 4 years and entered higher education in the fall of 2019. White, Asian, and female students had college-going rates that were above the district average and dropout rates below the district average. The groups with the lowest college-going rates were American Indian, special education, EL, multiracial, and Hispanic. This chart gives us a more complete picture of achievement gaps because it accounts for students who did not graduate when looking at higher education. For example, the gender gap in higher education enrollment increases from 11% to 15%, and the Black-white gap increases from 16% to 22%. We developed this chart to see how our graduation rate gaps are changing over time. We subtracted each non-white graduation rate from the white graduation rate to calculate the size of the gaps. Then we compared the class of 2013 to the class of 2019. Over these 6 years, most non-white student groups in OSSEO made progress in closing 4-year graduation rate gaps. This includes Asian, Black, Hispanic, English learners, students receiving free or reduced price meals, special education, and male students. Gaps for homeless, multiracial, and female students grew. In addition to providing results on the World's Best Workforce goals, we'll report on the perceptions of students, families, and staff on stakeholder surveys. The Student Stakeholder Survey has been administered in its present form since 2014. It's been focused on the district's strategic goals and priorities. The data were collected for the 2019-20 school year before the COVID closure. The table values are the average percent of students who responded positively to the questions on that particular scale. The color coding indicates cases where the annual targets for each scale were achieved or when the highest percentage positive was achieved. The most positive results were for student perceptions that adults trust them. On this scale, the target was achieved each year from 2015 to 2020. Students also perceived that they were being supported to achieve their dreams at targeted levels from 2015 through 2018. Although results have improved on the other scales since 2014, targets were not achieved for most years. These student survey scales were added in 2015, and since then there have been increases of 4% or more on the digital learning scale. We can also see that student perceptions of classroom respect have improved 2% or more since 2015. Student perceptions of classroom learning and teaching have been stable, with more than 80% of students positive about teaching and 76% or more students positive about classroom learning. In this table, we take the scale results for spring 2020 and break them out by student group. White, EL, and male students were the most positive overall. American Indian, Black, multiracial, and students receiving free or reduced price meals were the least positive overall. Black, EL, and special education students were the most positive on the Achieve Dreams scale, indicating that they have visions and dreams and that staff have supported them as they make progress toward achieving these visions and dreams. American Indian, Asian, Black, and students receiving free or reduced price meals were much less positive than other students in the areas of belonging, help, and trusting adults. Now we turn our attention to staff perceptions. The 2020 staff stakeholder survey was administered before the COVID closure, and in this chart we're comparing the 2020 results with the 2015 results to look at change over time. The greatest change from 2015 to 2020 was in the race and culture scale, where most staff groups reported a significant increase in participation, knowledge, and use of equity training. Early childhood, elementary, adult education, and Hispanic staff had significant increases on 2 or more survey scales from 2015 to 2020. Staff in special education sites had significant decreases on 2 scales with an increase on 1 scale.
Lastly, we'll take a look at some of the parent stakeholder survey results. This chart shows each of the survey scale scores over the past 3 survey administrations. Overall, we can see that all the scales are trending slightly downward. However, I wanted to bring attention to the 2 scales that have seen the largest decline since 2016. These are the Help for Parents and Belonging scales, which declined by 0.3 and 0.4 points respectively. The 3 highest scale ratings in 2020 were Student Support at 4.2 and Adult Trust and Help for Parents, both at 4.1.
The final section of our presentation includes student engagement during distance learning as measured by course grades or marks. Earlier in this presentation, we looked at kindergarten course marks, and here we're looking at marks for kindergarten through grade 5. This follows the same format. So the first row in each table is the percent of K through 5 students demonstrating attendance and engagement to be assessed on standards. The second row is the percent demonstrating work at least at a basic, simple, or inconsistent level. In a table is the percent that were proficient or excellent in all their courses. As we saw for kindergarten, when we look at K through 5, we find that white students achieved rates that were well above the other groups, especially when we look at percent proficient or excellent. At this level, in the all marks 3+ row, we can see that 6 groups have rates that are less than half the rate for white students: homeless, Black, Hispanic, EL, special education, and students receiving free meals. We're also seeing the gender gap widening. When looking only at kindergarten, females were 9 percentage points above males. When we look at K through 5, females are 17 percentage points higher. Again, these are baseline data collected during the pandemic, so these percentages should increase significantly in the future. Here we're looking at the percent of students in grades 6 through 12 who were passing all their courses. In these tables, each row is a different period of time. The first row is from the first 2 trimesters of last year before the COVID closure. Trimester 3 of last year and trimester 1 of this year both were during COVID. As we saw with elementary grades, white students were most likely to pass all their courses at each point in time, and homeless students were the least likely. In trimester 1 of this year, Black, Hispanic, EL, special education, students receiving free meals, and homeless students all had passing rates that were 30% lower than those for white students. The groups that experienced the greatest drop in passing rates during the COVID were Asian, Hispanic, and EL students.
Thank you, Jenna, Tom, and Jeremy. At this time, we welcome any questions or comments that you may have.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. I'm going to start with, I just want to say, given it's 10:11, we probably will have time for one round, and then if there's any follow-up, and then we'll move on. I think last time we did this, we all got kicked off of the call. It got too late. So, okay, I'm going to start with Director Brooks.
Okay. So thank you everyone for the presentation. Just a couple of hopefully quick questions. One was related to the college credit courses. There was a slide that showed each of the high schools and sort of what was offered. So just a kind of a quick question for me is how are we ensuring that our Park Center scholars have access to the college credit courses that aren't available at Park Center but offered at Osseo or Maple Grove?
Michael or Jeremy want to speak to kind of the course offerings piece? I know, Michael, you've had first-hand experience as a high school principal recently, so you've lived this a little bit with how we wrestle with what we offer at each of the three schools, right?
So I think that the nuance that really wasn't spoken to was that the reason for the uptick at Osseo Senior High School, that we did college in the schools. So we did a big push over the last couple of years to provide some opportunities for our educators to take 15 online. So essentially 15 credits that they could take that was free. And when they completed the coursework, they were able to offer college level courses. So our scholars did not need to go to PSEO. They could take college level courses that in some cases transfer even better than AP classes that was going to begin to their trajectory towards an AA degree and so forth. So that is not unique to Osseo. Truly any educator would be able to access those resources and begin to build out their profile of college opportunities there. So that's the reason why disproportionately Osseo had a little bit more opportunities there.
Thank you. So just to follow up on that, again, just looking at access, is there a plan to make sure that Park Center scholars have access to the same courses or similar courses? Yeah, how are we approaching that?
I don't know, Kelly. I don't know if you want to. I've not spoken to the principal there, so I trust that certainly the principal at Park Center has a plan. I don't know what I can't speak to kind of what that looks like. So, Kelly, I see you on mute.
You know, Thomas, I will definitely, be talking with the principal at Park Center, but I'm frankly questioning just in my own mind these numbers. And so I need to just get more information around the numbers as well. And then, go from there. Making sure that that's all even accurate.
Thank you. And then just maybe sort of a comment, but one of the statistics that sort of caught me off guard, and I know there was a lot presented, was the low percentages on the student stakeholder survey related to achieving dreams. I know if you ask students or families what the purpose of education is, that answer would vary probably greatly from family to family, but one could argue, and many could argue, that the purpose is to support our students in achieving their dreams. And so when I see such low percentages on a survey like that, it feels like there's a disconnect, and it makes it that much harder for our scholars to meet standards in some of those core subjects if they're not able to find any purpose in what they're doing. So I do sort of have a general question in how we are approaching that specific item of making sure that we are creating a blueprint for them to achieve their dreams. And I don't know if anyone can answer or add context to that. I do know, and this is just off the top of my mind because it's recent, kind of a shout out to Maple Grove Middle School, who is in the process of going through an initiative. Principal Smith, Kendra Grant, I believe, is the parent that's sort of leading that initiative. And I believe it's Tell Me About It to sort of introduce scholars to the career options available to them, and sort of bring real experience or real people in front of the scholars. So just wondering how we're actually approaching that. I do think that that is a significant disparity.
So Director Brooks, we started attacking this last winter in our strategic planning efforts with our stakeholder engagement with the core question of what do you want the daily lived experience to be in our system? Asking our students, parents, staff, what should that desired daily experience be, as we were beginning to build, that roadmap for us on how to address that issue. Now we're going to probably need to go back and get another second scoop on that because of everything that's happened with COVID. And that was work that was done December, January, February, right before we went into lockdown. So we really had a strong initial effort to ask, our stakeholders, what is that desired experience look like? And that will feed, how do we more strongly meet that desired achieving your dreams target. So once we are, we're getting close to being able to really be much more aggressive with that work again here once we can get back to more in-person learning. And that was something we were targeting a year ago before we had a lot of things come at us. So know that that's part of our overall larger strategic plan work that you as a board will be beginning to set a new kind of scope and sequence and calendar for how we reignite all that work.
Thank you.
I just want to add one quick clarification with regard to that scale. And the scale is only 3 questions. One of the questions is, I have visions or dreams. The second one is, a staff member has helped me to identify my visions or dreams. And the third question is, a staff member has helped me to make progress towards these goals or visions or dreams. And so what we found with that particular scale is students that spend more time with staff. And so EL students, generally special education students, we found a pattern that students of color are more likely to be spending that time with staff. They're actually more positive on that scale than white students are. And so that's just one little bit of context, with regard to that particular scale and what we've looked at there. But yeah, we'll go into much more depth with the new process.
I'm sorry, I'll leave it there. I know we're short, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. Director Simons.
Yeah, it's a lot of information to be digesting. And again, it hasn't really moved significantly than our past presentations, which we know that's why we're doing our strategic planning and focusing in on some key priorities. So I think it'll help inform our specific tactics that we want to prioritize going forward. I do think there's some really intriguing options out there that we could consider with individual student plans and goals to help increase engagement and make that connection between academic performance and achieving dreams. So I think these are things that the board has discussed in the past, and how do we fit that into our priorities going forward, knowing the urgency that remains on just filling the gaps due to COVID, and then accelerating into some new initiatives. So continuing to process that information. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Grady.
Thank you once again for a really great and thorough presentation, and it really gives us a lot of information to think about in terms of what kind of metrics we're using to define success and where to look in those areas. I did have a question. I can kind of come up with a narrative for a lot of the reasons for a lot of the gaps, but what do you think is the reasons for the consistent gap in science in Osseo District?
I don't know that I have a specific singular item that I can point to. But what I can offer is that that data that we are looking at has been one of the most important reasons why we have been in the process over the course of last year and continuing into this year of a curriculum adoption science, or of a curriculum adoption cycle, excuse me, in the area of elementary and secondary science. We've already made some shifts at the middle school level, and we're continuing to look at additional shifts that can take place not just at the middle school level, but at the high school level as well. And then looking at what we're going to do differently at the elementary level to support instruction in the content area of science. So teachers across the system have been heavily involved in those conversations over the course of the past year and a half. And we're just really excited at some of the unique opportunities that the changes in science standards are presenting us with, so that we can move forward in with some new scientific experiences that we hope will be more engaging and more enriching for students. And then just to backfill that, of course, anytime we're looking at a standards review or a potential curriculum adoption or an adoption of a new resource, we want to ensure that teachers have the prerequisite professional learning experiences they need to be successful in the delivery of those instructional experiences for students. So I think that's a big step that we've been in the process of taking that we're really excited about, and we're hoping to continue to build momentum as we move forward in making changes in that area of science specifically. So that's a good question. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a good answer. I know it's not an easy thing to answer. And to follow up on that, would we be considering increasing the standards on math? Because the math performance is poor, and if you talk to anybody who teaches college, there's a lot of remedial work going when college-bound students do hit the higher education level.
So as far as math is concerned, last year, we actually finished our curriculum adoption cycle for secondary math right before the school closure and the pandemic. Unfortunately, we didn't feel as though it was appropriate for us to fully implement a new curriculum resource this past fall, given the uncertainty of what type of learning model our students and teachers and families would be experiencing. So what we proposed to the board, I honestly can't remember if it was last spring or into the early summer, but what we proposed was a more staggered implementation of this new resource to ensure that it would be more successful, that students would be more successful, that teachers would feel more comfortable without having that access to in-person professional development for teachers or in-person collaborative conversation and experiences among students, which is such an important nuance of where we're trying to go with mathematics instruction, especially at the secondary level. So trying to do that or replicate that virtually, as we all know, is far more challenging. So we're excited about implementing that in full, and it's coming. I promise it's coming. It's just we want to make sure that we're making strategic and intelligent decisions around when's the right or when's the best time to do that so we can really maximize everyone's success. So that's kind of the thinking around secondary math. For elementary math, we were able to complete a full-scale curriculum adoption. That's where we adopted Bridges in Mathematics. We are just a few years into, 2-3 years into our implementation of that curriculum resource. So as teachers continue to get more comfortable and we continue to have more opportunities to support them with this resource and engage them in ongoing professional development, we're really excited at the positive possibilities that that resource will have for students.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Director Douglas.
Thank you. This has been really a lot of information to digest, and I think just further emphasizes how critical our strategic priority work will be going forward to ensure better outcomes for all of our students. I don't really have any questions at this time. I just feel like it's more compounding information, affirming that we're on the right path, that we really need to make some positive changes to ensure high success for all of our learners. And also considering that we've had a huge hiccup in learning for all of our students with this last year, learning in a pandemic setting has been a challenge for so many of our students. And I feel that it's almost like it's hard to even consider the data of this year as relevant almost, because we know that their ability to be successful is greater than what we're seeing in the statistics, because we weren't able to do all of the tests that we normally do and keep track of the progress that we normally do. It's been a different way of evaluating or not evaluating. So I just feel like this is just an affirmation that we need to charge ahead hastily so that we can ensure academic success for all of our students.
Thank you, Director Douglas. Director Mosqueda Jones.
Yes, thank you. I just want to say that after all this data on world's best workforce, that it's pretty clear that we need to do our work with mental health and with our equity work so that we can pull it all together and stop having such devastating disparities in our district. I just have a couple of super quick questions. I didn't see any kind of demographic breakdown on AP classes. It feels like to me, from what I've seen, that there's been it's not representative of our demographics for kids who are in AP, and whether or not that means they're choosing college and schools or PSEO. Just something to, I don't think you need to like explain all of it right now, but if you could send us some of that information, I would greatly appreciate it. And then the other thing is regarding the kindergarten marks. When we present data on pre-K and TS Gold, and then we present data on kindergarten, when we know that we have the majority of our kindergarten students didn't go to pre-K in our district, right? So I'm wondering if we have any data that can compare kids who had a preschool experience and kids who had our pre-K experience and kids that had no pre-K experience, if there's any kind of kindergarten or data going up now that we've had a good, okay, really only 2 years of gold data, but hopefully we're required to do it this year because I'm doing it. So hopefully we'll have some more data on that. So those are just my 2 quick things.
Thank you, Director Mosqueda Jones. I think I said the same thing last year. I mean, this data is extremely unsettling, and I think even more so compounding the fact that we haven't had a normal school year. Students haven't been in our buildings due to the pandemic. I'm really concerned about the impact, next year, as we see this year move forward. So, I think that as we look at our strategic priorities and focus, as others have stated, I mean, to be honest, I'm not really sure what more data we actually really need to be looking for and searching for constantly. I think we really have it right here in order to really firm up our prioritizations and focus areas in our district. And so, but yes, there's a lot of information to kind of digest, and I think also to connect the dots, in all of this work. It's so interrelated, like we've said before. So I look forward to, I think this really set the tone for the year. I think all of this really gave us some context, both academically, but then also just the entire educational experience our scholars have and their families. So with that, I thank everyone for your time, and it's 10:30. We have one more short update from Superintendent McIntyre, but thanks for holding on tonight, and I'll turn it over to you, Superintendent McIntyre.
Yeah, thank you. And I know I'm against the clock because we learned the hard way. Our computer shut off at 11 recently. So I do want to just comment a little bit as we transition to this next topic. I really appreciate all of you identifying the fact that you know, it was very intentional tonight to pair these topics together because they're so interrelated and so integrated together. And it's really the best up-to-date comprehensive perspective on our realities is from a data perspective, but you also heard it from a human perspective in our presentations tonight. So you heard things about our academic, you know, our racial and other student group academic and opportunity gaps, our student mental health and well-being gaps, right? And we really are, like, I think many of the director board members kind of said it very well. We got to really, you do well at one, it'll impact the others. And if we can do well at all three, we'll see improvements. And, you know, the pandemic, it was pointed out how the pandemic's only made things more challenging and difficult, exacerbated numbers. And when we begin to get more data coming in, you know, learning's been interrupted a lot this year. We need to be really focusing on core instruction as we get back into normalcy as whenever that time comes. And how do we teach differently? And Jeremy did a great job explaining, you know, we have some really good opportunity in front of us with some of the academic areas, and you heard our support teams, student services teams talk about some opportunities in front of us from a well-being standpoint. And I always think of even nutritional well-being when you throw that in there as well with academic and social emotional well-being. So this gives us a firm grounding of what, you know, it's just a good reality check on where it'll really help us focus our prioritization of our work as we move into the coming months and the next year, as all of you kind of pointed out. So I'm going to transition to the next topic here, give you a very brief update on the learning model information here, and I just got to get to the presentation. And I'll kind of go for kind of quickly through some of this, but I did want to just point out again, it was said a few times tonight, and I think everything we've seen in our presentations tonight only clarifies the need for us to prioritize in-person learning as soon as we can safely do it, right? And we heard again tonight how we know our students love to be with their students, or their friends and their peers. They need to be. We know staff prefer to be in person in those interactions and supporting our teacher and student relationships. And we know this many children learn better when physically in our classrooms. So you've seen in my communications with stakeholders regarding our move to in-person learning that we're making right now, how much I stress we believe in that in-person learning and it best meets the needs instructionally, mental health, social, emotional, and even nutritionally. And our goal is to do that as well as we can and as safe as we can and as fast as we can. So I've been able to try to keep the board members up to date on the rapidly changing information we have. Know that, well, on the 18th, the board supported that move to in-person learning for elementary. And you know, next Monday we'll be starting full-time in person with pre-K through second grade, and then our 3rd through 5th graders start in person full-time on February 1st. And so the next 3 days, tomorrow, Thursday, and Friday, our teachers and staff are getting ready for that. They're preparing, getting their classrooms ready, we're getting all of our logistics and operational elements in place. So we're very excited for that first phase and that rolling start with our youngest learners right now. So the update I have, before I get into some of the numbers and things like that, I shouldn't have clicked on the presentation quite yet, but we are watching this case rate data. We're watching closely the ever-changing daily information on what we know around vaccines. Our staff COVID testing program is set up and ready to start on January 25th, and testing will be offered at every site every other Monday. So we're, in the middle of operationally just getting all those things in place for our in-person learning at the elementary level. So I'm going to go quickly through some slides here as I'm watching the clock, and just to get to the heart of the presentation. You're all very familiar with our key readiness indicators. We will continue to update those, but those 10 things really are our best roadmap for how we're doing in it from a readiness standpoint. We're currently in this level 3 in our learning model, continuing to do this combination of in-person learning with distance learning at the secondary level. This continues to hold up when we look at our learning model considerations, when we look at community impact, our operational effectiveness, and our school safety measures. We'll continue to use, as far as we can see at this point, a continued review of that data we continue to get, continue to build those recommendations as we get more knowledge on the changing dynamics. We meet regularly every week, multiple times a week actually, with our county and state agencies and our leadership in our system. And then we come to you as a board for recommendations, and then we implement those. So our decision-making framework has held up as well, and we'll continue to use that. I did want to point out here, as we now think of our approach to secondary in-person learning, because those questions are continuing to come, and the state has been very clear to follow the initial parameters with this framework as a starting point, along with our city and district data. So just to kind of highlight, that threshold of 30 at the county level is the beginning point of thinking we've got to be below that threshold of 30 for any hybrid secondary learning happening, and we need to get all the way down to single digits for full in-person, including secondary. We all hope to see that soon. We've seen a drop in the numbers that they've leveled off a bit here, as you'll see right now. So this is the updated. The reason this packet these materials weren't in your packet tonight was we just got the data this morning, so literally put these slides together here this afternoon to update everybody. Our most recent county rate is at 35.6, just slightly down from last week's rate of 38.6. But you can see the dramatic drop that we saw over the last few weeks, and there was some sense of what could have been some artificial numbers over the holidays because of the impact of the holidays, and now hopefully some more reliable numbers is what our county partners are telling us. Here's our city level data. So we are at 46.2 in Brooklyn Park, 47.9 in Brooklyn Center, and 35.4 Maple Grove, with a small uptick actually in Plymouth back up to 34.3. So we really do look at this local context when we think of some of those thresholds and how it's impacting us locally. In regard to the county, we've consistently been one of the higher, if not having some of the highest city rates in the county as you compare it to the county rate. We haven't been in person because of distance learning and the holidays, so our cases internally have been relatively low as compared to what you saw in the fall as we were approaching the holidays. This past week, we've had 17 cases of positive cases of COVID. You see the breakdown between staff and students. And when it comes to symptomatic cases, only 9 reported to us this past week. 6 with students and 3 with staff. And then lastly, our close contact cases that were reported to us, 24 of those, 13 with staff and 11 with students. But again, we think because we're not in person, that reporting is it's not coming quite as easily. As we move more into in-person learning, I think we will see more reliable numbers on that. But I wanted to give you the last week's data as far as our district numbers go. Also, this has been a good tool for us throughout the last few weeks, and comparing our own internal 14-day case rate when it comes to staff and students. So with the holidays and the distance learning model, we've seen our lowest point here this week, 12.6, although as we move to in-person learning, we're going to probably see that number move back up. So that leads me to the kind of staffing conversation. One of our biggest challenges as we transition in is keeping our staff safe and healthy. And when we're back in person, we know those possible close contacts and quarantine situations through contact tracing are going to increase just because we're physically back in person. So how much will be, hopefully we're tempering that with our mitigation strategies, with testing, with the additional PPE that we're providing, and all those efforts. So we have another challenge of when someone is out once we're in person, we have to physically cover their absence versus covering their absence when we're in a distance learning space. So the sub shortage could be an issue for us. Again, we're going to watch that very closely. And I want to give a shout out to our HR team and all of our building leaders for working really hard to find as many subs and options for us to make sure we have adequate coverage as we get into full in-person learning. For example, another example is our ESPs that are not in our special ed setting 3 programs or other support. We have a really hard time getting subs for them. They just simply don't have subs. So shortage of staff to support and supervise students could be an issue. We experienced that at our high point with the case rates in early November. Luckily, the numbers have come way down since then, but we gained a lot of experience through that. And really the threshold that we realized was right around that 50 mark. You can see we're just under that in our cities. That was a key threshold for us having significant staffing challenges. The Department of Health has pointed out that held up across the state. When districts got into the county rates of 30 to 50, that's when serious operational challenges, especially staffing, really began to be a significant problem and closed schools early because they couldn't staff them. We have posted some additional positions for continuous subs to help us with that issue. And we've reached out to our fall student teachers regarding any continuous sub and substitute positions they may be interested in as far as some recruiting efforts. We will be moving into really a daily data pull on our absences by building and really monitoring not only who's absent, but what staff are absent and how they impact any given school based on their size and number of staff they have in the building. So the staffing impact is probably one of the biggest challenges we're facing as we move into full in-person learning. The update from our regional support team from last week, they were very pleased, and we're all cautiously optimistic about the dramatic drop we've seen in numbers. Those numbers have leveled off. The 2 weeks around the holidays were a little artificial from their perspective, and the recent data we're getting now is more reliable and accurate from the county health perspective, especially. With more things opening up with the governor's order, we're going to, the county and MDH are really closely monitoring any impacts for that, including youth sports and high school sports, and will that have any impact on the case rates? The new variant virus there's been a lot of conversation around it. As you know, it has been confirmed over the weekend in Minnesota, and we've been told nothing's been verified by public health, but what they're learning, they'll say is they suspect, and we've been seeing it in the media, that even though it's more, there's a component of it being more contagious, not more severe as far as symptoms, but more contagious and likely more transmittable through our older students, our teenagers, and not in our younger ages as the original virus was also showing. So again, public health's been very careful that they haven't verified that, but that's kind of the guidance we've been getting in our calls. As far as vaccine goes, we're hopeful that our school nurses will be able to be vaccinated in the next 2 weeks, as they may be called on to help with some broader distribution of virus. The rest of our staff is really to be determined. Our cities do not have city-level public health, so we are relying on Hennepin County Public Health, and they are waiting for the plan from MDH on how they're going to prioritize school personnel or teachers. So we have been giving our input on how we believe that could be done if we have any vaccine provided, how we could prioritize our staff, especially those staff who are in person with our students. So right now, their recommendation to us from a public health standpoint is continue to move forward with the early, our youngest learners, elementary learners, fully in person. Do not make a change yet with secondary students while those case rates are where they're at, and really do a good job with full implementation and operational success with our elementary students to get all our mitigation strategies in place, get that testing program up and running, and then keep monitoring. And so we have our next consultation on Thursday, but I don't believe, as I get into the summary piece here, it's not time yet for a new recommendation on our secondary students because of some of those unknowns with the age and their susceptibility to the virus. And really just that rolling start and getting things implemented successfully so that we can sustain it and not have to go back to distance learning, for example, at the elementary level. So my hope is, when we get to an in-person spot, we're able to stay there throughout the rest of the year. We are, however, planning right now what we can do to get our secondary special education services that are intensive going again here, and we hope to have that completed probably by the end of the week, and may even be communicating early next week to families about offering some of those really intensive services for special education. So that is kind of where we stand. I'm going to leave the remaining minutes for any questions you have, and as you've seen, I've been giving you almost daily updates on information that's coming to us from the various agencies and meetings that I'm having, and the state work group that I'm on with the deputy commissioner and MDH. There's a number of people on that state work group that we've been meeting with too, and all of what I just recommended really align with what they're saying and things that we're planning for. So it's still kind of a week by week approach with again, I'll go back to where I started. We believe in person is the best, and we saw it again tonight. All of our data and all of our presentations really underscored the importance and effectiveness of being in person with our students. We just have to be able to do it safely, keep our staff safe, and be able to sustain it, and hopefully avoid moving back in and out of different models as we get into the later winter months. So Chair Dawson Walton, I'll kind of turn it back to you and facilitate any questions that you may have at board.
Okay, thank you, Superintendent McIntyre. I'll just start down. Director Mosqueda Jones.
Superintendent McIntyre, the only question I have is, how are we going to make sure that staff can get paid when they have to quarantine? Do we have the COVID money relief again? Do they have COVID days? I just don't want people coming in sick.
Yeah, right. If they test positive or have to be quarantined per our protocols, then they get extended sick leave.
Okay, thank you. Director Simons.
Thanks. I agree with you, Superintendent McIntyre, that the presentations tonight greatly emphasize the need to be in person, and that's what our families are asking for. Many districts are already beginning to announce dates for return for secondary. However, at the same time, I understand the need to ensure that we're operationally sustainable. So I think understanding what happens with elementary in terms of potential absences or positive cases or the close contacts, I think that's something to watch very closely. At the same time, I think that we should be proactively planning for when we can get secondary back. I know that your team is managing all of those pieces in the right order. So I think both can be true. I think we can have a sense of urgency that we all desire to return to in person, but we also want to be prudent in our operational planning. So thank you for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you. And you pointed out something I'll just comment on real quick. There are some subtle differences between our communities. So I always remind people that ask me about this, what a district in the southern metro might be doing and when they're going to launch their in-person for secondary. It's because their local story may be a little different than ours is. And so we're really trying to keep in mind our local context. It comes up in every conversation. They hear about another district doing something and why aren't we doing that yet? And we're really making our decisions based on our own local needs and our capacity to do it well, right? So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you. And Director Grady.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm wondering, while we do know that it's best for students to be in school, everybody's assessment of risk is different. And so how are we handling the students and the families who don't feel like they're ready for their kids to take that risk and being back at school?
Yeah,
what options do they have?
Yeah, that's a good question, and we're doing the best we can with our elementary staff being back fully in person. They're going to be teaching full time, so we don't have the ability to also offer a parallel kind of hybrid distance learning option. We're watching closely the request for for our DLA option as well. And then in between those transitions, we're going to do our best to, if a student, for example, is out ill, then we'll work with their local teacher, their classroom teacher, on what we can provide them instructionally. But once we make a move to in person, we're really hopeful and expecting that we can get our students in school and trying to reassure our families that it's safe. And I know that's a challenge right now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Brooks.
I just have a similar question to Director Grady's, and this probably goes back to the fall as well, actually the spring. But how are we, for those students that do have to quarantine and stay home for a week, 14 days, how are we making sure that they do not fall behind?
Yeah, we are making sure that they're staying connected to their classroom teacher at their school, the teachers, because they often have more than one teacher that they're connected to, and providing them as much work, depending on their level of illness as well. If they're quarantined or if they're sick, it could be two different things. But they're going to work with their classroom teacher on what we can provide, because we're going to be, again, we need to keep in mind that our teachers are going to be really focused on their classrooms, and their full classrooms for the first time this whole school year. And then we'll continue to, we still are providing that transition to DLA for any health accommodations that are needed. And if families can, if they want to choose that option, it's there for them. So I don't think our waiting list might have been all the way down to zero. There could be, it's fluid, but the numbers were significantly down to almost zero for the waiting list there. Hope that helps.
Thank you.
Okay. And Director Douglas.
Thank you. My fellow board members have asked all the questions that I had and said all the remarks I had. So just thank you. And I just want to emphasize how important it is that we get our students back to school as soon as possible, as safely as possible, with the resources that we have available to us. So thank you.
Thank you. One question I had is, do you know when vaccinations are available?
No.
For teachers?
The only indication we've gotten is maybe in the next 2 weeks for our nurses, but we've been given no timeline for teachers. The state has been publicly saying they're still working on that tier 1A through the month of January. So that's all the emergency care workers. And then our teachers are in that tier 1B. But so I don't, that the next 2 weeks gets us through January. So we're hopeful for February. But again, we've not been given anything concrete from Hennepin County as they're working with the Department of Health for the prioritization that they're trying to do with who might get it first, as far as even within the teacher group, right? So we would be prioritizing anybody who's supporting students in person first.
Okay. And I know you and your team, you are playing zone defense constantly, trying to combat so many different questions and comparing other districts. But I do really think, hearing what we heard tonight, we know that how important in-person learning really is. And obviously we want it done safely. There's a lot of nuances, but it just seems that is really the goal that I know we're all really focused on here. So
I really want to take a moment to just stress and thank the amazing amount of work that's happening right now to prepare for us being fully in person on next Monday. Our building leaders and our teachers are just working extremely hard, because this isn't just going back to the way it was pre-COVID. It's going back to all our kids back with a whole lot of changes and how we're going to do that, how we're going to make it work in the building. So sorting out lunch and music and all those things in a totally different way with all the kids back. I have been just totally impressed with how everyone is stepping up to make it happen, because we all see that same common goal of getting our students back. So everything from Ron's department and all the operational things, from cleaning, our bus drivers and how they're going to manage students fully back on our buses, to our all the HR efforts I talked about earlier, just all the departments, childcare. We're running childcare the next 3 days at Maple Grove Middle School for young kids. We've been very creative with how to make a lot of these services happen, and getting all the technology back into our classrooms so that we can be effective in that way. The list goes on. And every day we uncover some new challenges. I think Steve Fliff's hair is much more gray than it ever has been because of the work we've been doing with the elementary principals the last few days. And I know they're, when you get a chance to see any of our elementary staff or district staff who are supporting it, please commend them for the effort to be successful. And it's not to take away any of the work at the secondary level either, but this is a big undertaking. Our elementaries have not been together all year. So this will be the first time. And we want to do it in a way that we can keep it that way. So I just want to shout out to, and I really do want to thank all of our union partnerships as well in helping us sort out all the challenges to make it work. So I'm really grateful for the leadership of all of our union groups that have stepped up to help as well. So with that, Chair Dawson Walton, I'll stop before we run out of time.
Yeah, we don't want to get kicked off. Yeah, I know my husband always says during this pandemic, have we ever even been through this before? We're all doing the best that we can. So we appreciate everyone, all of our families and scholars and everybody chiming in and voicing their, hearing their voices. So, all right, well, with that, this work session is adjourned at 10:57 p.m. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.